Welcome to MysteryCon. They buried breakthrough cures in noise, erased entire channels and staged raids, all to hide one truth. Takedowns, server wipes, even fabricated lab fires. Nothing was off limits in the effort to suppress a single frequency. This is the untold story of censored science, missing researchers, and a cure too powerful to be commercialized. Before this video vanishes like so many before it, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Do you believe sound can truly transform the body? Also, how was your day? Take a moment, reflect, and then let's begin. The first clip didn't sound like anything special, but after I played it, I slept for 10 hours straight, and the pain in my wrist was gone. My name's Sarah Lynn. I run a sleep channel with just over 3 million subscribers. Soft triggers, no talking, mostly ambient sound design. It came in a padded envelope with no return address, no note, no branding, not even a name. Just a USB drive, tucked between 2 layers of bubble wrap like a secret not meant to be seen. I get weird stuff all the time. Fan letters, custom triggers, even the occasional whisper fetish tape. But something about this one felt off. The packaging was too neat, too sterile. I set it aside for a day, forgot about it, then opened. It half distracted while editing a slime taping video. Inside the folder were 6 files labeled only with numbers, no metadata, no tags, no embedded authorship. Just 6 raw audio tracks. Out of curiosity, I played the first one through my editing software. Headphones on, volume low, standard safety drill. At first, I didn't hear anything. I thought the file was corrupted, but then the waveform on the screen began to shift. Slow, pulsing bands, unlike anything I'd seen in traditional ASMR or binaural recordings. There were no whispers, no clicks, no identifiable triggers, just a low, rhythmic hum like wind through distant glass. I hadn't slept that deeply in years. Most nights I'd lie awake until 2 or 3, editing videos I didn't care about, chasing deadlines that felt more like distractions. The migraines were constant. My inbox was noise. My own voice, even edited, had begun to sound foreign. I used to love making this kind of content. Somewhere along the line, it had turned into something else. That's probably why I didn't delete the clip. Part of me needed it to mean something. I didn't upload it at first. I'm not reckless. I ran it through every spectral analysis tool I had. No frequencies above 20 kHz, no hidden data, no watermarks, just sound. Pure and simple, but it wasn't. That clip had done something. And before I understood why, I made a choice that would unravel everything. I posted it, just to see what would happen. The clip went live at 8:14 p.m. I didn't hype it, didn't title it anything provocative, just experimental tone test, low hum variant. The thumbnail was a blank grey square. I figured maybe a few thousand would click out of curiosity. By midnight, it had over 90,000 views. The comments were the first thing that tipped me off. Not the usual whisper request spam or timestamp debates. These were different. People said they felt a strange warmth in their hands, a numbness leaving their legs, pain dissolving in their backs. A woman claimed she hadn't walked without her cane in years until that night. Another said the ringing in his ears stopped halfway through the playback. I read each comment twice, then 3 times. I didn't know whether to feel proud or sick. By morning, the video was gone, taken down. A copyright strike had been issued by an account with no profile picture and a name I didn't recognize. Parametric, Oral MedTech LLC. The channel page was blank. No uploads. No links. When I clicked on the complaint ID, it routed to a broken page. My appeal was rejected before it even submitted. I'd had takedowns before. Someone once flagged my gum chewing loop as violating organic consumption rights, or whatever that means. But this was surgical, precise, and fast. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up digging into the clip's properties again, but it was the same. Flat spectrum, clean tone, nothing embedded, nothing traceable, except one tiny change I hadn't noticed before. The original file had a short silence at the end, 4 seconds of dead air. But now that silence was missing. Clipped. Replaced with something faint and granular, like static behind glass. I recorded the audio and boosted the levels. At 3:17 a.m. through the hiss, I heard a voice. Just one word. Residual. I sat in the dark, headphones on, my hands ice cold. I didn't understand what I'd started, but I knew now it wasn't about tingles or relaxation. Whatever I'd played and shared wasn't made for sleep. It was designed to do something, and somewhere, someone didn't want it heard. I spent the next day scrubbing through my inbox. The moment the clip vanished, messages poured in. Some were frantic, others were calm, almost reverent. One stood out, a short email from an address with no name, no subject line, just a single sentence. Not all frequencies are public domain. Attached was a file, smaller than the last, just under 2 megabytes. I ran it through a sandboxed system before opening. The waveform was different, shorter, tighter pulses. No fade-in. I listened once, speakers low, fingers hovering over the kill switch. It started with a low hum, almost mechanical, but then layered tones folded in, like tiny digital threads pulling against each other. 30 seconds in, I felt pressure behind my eyes. Not pain, more like relief, like something unwinding inside my skull. I didn't realize my nose had started bleeding until I felt it on my lip. I cleaned up and played it again, this time with the waveform running. The spectrogram showed fragments, vertical lines that shouldn't be there. I froze the frame and zoomed in. It looked like data. Not sound, but signal. Embedded code, hidden in the structure of the tone. I uploaded a screenshot to a forum I trusted, private, invitation only, mostly ex-signal techs and digital forensics hobbyists. Within minutes, I got a message from someone named Null Vector. "You're not crazy," they wrote. "This looks like fractal encoded modulation, medical grade. Someone's hiding healing protocols inside audio." That was the moment I stopped thinking like a creator and started thinking like a liability. I checked my channel's analytics. Every view of the pulled clip was now listed as unavailable. My ad revenue dropped to 0. The dashboard reset itself. My scheduled uploads had vanished. Even my backup drive, which was never connected to the internet, showed corrupted versions of the file. Like something had reached into my system from the outside and wiped it clean. I called it what it was: digital ghosting, not just deletion, erasure, not just copyright, but control. I hadn't imagined this. I wasn't chasing shadows. Something was actively burying the truth, and somehow I'd ended up at the center of it. Null Vector and I started talking in a secure chat room the next night. They wouldn't give a name or even a city, just said they worked in signal analysis for a non-public contractor and had seen similar audio anomalies before. I asked if they'd ever heard of something called parametric oral medtech. They replied within seconds, "Not under that name, but the signature matches a group of shelved patents under a company called Neuro-Oral. That ring a bell?" It didn't, not then. But when I searched, the results were strange. No website. No recent articles. Just one archived tech blog post from 7 years ago titled Startup aims to heal with sound. The company's founder was listed as Dr. Aidan Moura. A photo showed a man in his 40s, dark eyes, faint smile, holding what looked like a prototype audio device about the size of a portable recorder. Beneath the image, a caption, "Frequency-based tissue repair. Neuro-oral thinks it's possible." I dug deeper. The company had been funded by Theracore Group, a pharmaceutical giant I'd only heard of in passing, mostly tied to chronic pain treatments and neurology grants. Then the trail ended. Neuro-oral folded less than 2 years after that article, citing regulatory redirection. No lawsuits, no bankruptcy filings. Just gone. I asked Nullvector what happened. They responded with a single line, "They work too well." That phrase echoed for hours. I couldn't let it go. I started pulling old audio patents from the public register, searching for anything filed under Theracore or its shell companies. The list was massive, dozens of entries for things like subthreshold tonal therapy and modulated binaural pathways. Most had been marked as inactive or pending indefinitely. It didn't make sense. If these tones could ease pain, reduce inflammation, even accelerate healing, why bury them? Nullvector answered before I could ask. Because sound doesn't need a prescription. You can't sell silence at $600 a bottle. I sat there, staring at the waveform from the latest clip. It wasn't noise, it was a message, a treatment, maybe even a cure. And someone was fighting like hell to keep it off the record. 2 days later, I met WaveNull, not in person. Through a VPN tunnel routed through 7 nodes. They were a loose collective, former researchers, codebreakers, archivists. Some had worked in labs, others in telecom. One had helped design content filters for major platforms. Now they broke them. I sent them the raw tone files and screenshots of the corrupted versions. They confirmed it. Real-time suppression, done at the protocol level, not just flagged by content algorithms, but blocked mid-transit. That only happens, they said, when the filters are written before the content goes public, meaning someone already knew what the files contained. WaveNull showed me how deep it went. Theracore held over 400 audio-related patents through various shell companies. Most were marked as audio IP, but the descriptions gave them away: frequencies to inhibit neuroreceptors, to stimulate rapid protein repair, to modulate trauma pathways. Some included data from human trials, unpublished, unapproved, and abruptly terminated. All were sealed behind obscure copyright laws, not medical ones. That was the trick. If they framed it as intellectual property, they could suppress it without triggering clinical oversight. I asked where the original frequencies came from. That's when they mentioned Dr. Moura again. According to WaveNull, he didn't disappear, he went underground. He'd begun leaking stripped-down versions of the tone protocols through ASMR channels. Low-risk format, easy to embed. I was just the latest delivery system. I hadn't been chosen, I'd been useful. The pieces fell into place. The pain relief, the healing, the sudden censorship. It wasn't coincidence, it was a test run. And now I was a variable outside their control. WaveNull offered help. They could protect my files, mirror my uploads, route around takedown bots. But they warned me, once I crossed that line, there was no going back. No monetization. No safety net. No easy explanation when someone showed up at my door. I asked one question. Can people get better from this? They didn't hesitate. Some already have. I told them to send everything they had, and to keep the next clip ready. I wasn't chasing clicks anymore. I was chasing the signal. That night I sat in front of the camera for nearly an hour before going live. My hands hovered over the controls, trembling slightly. I kept checking the lock on the door, listening for footsteps, for silence. I'd been followed once before, just a week prior, but I told myself it was nothing. Now I wasn't so sure. Every instinct said this was the last chance, not to be heard, but to be useful. I uploaded the blank placeholder, no title, no tags, just a static frame and a silent countdown, a dead signal hiding something alive. When the timer hit 0, I kept my voice low and steady. No whispering, no tingles, just explanation. I told them the tones were real, mapped from old clinical data, designed to do more than relax. They weren't spiritual, they weren't magic. They were frequency therapy, hidden, discredited, and now resurfacing through backdoors like mine. Underneath the stream, I embedded 3 tones. One layered into each stereo channel. Pain modulation, neural balancing, tissue response triggers, all sourced from the neuro-oral archive Wave Null had salvaged. 10 minutes in, the chat shifted. It wasn't about sound quality or mic settings, it was stories. People describing waves of warmth, numbness leaving their limbs, vision sharpening midstream. Someone said their jaw stopped aching. Another wrote that they could breathe deeper for the first time in months. Just before the blackout, I thought I heard something outside. A low hum. Not from the laptop, but from the street. I muted the stream for a second and leaned toward the window. A van idled across the road, headlights off. I hadn't seen it earlier, its engine cut. Silence followed. Then, without warning, the stream went black. My router crashed. My backup system locked up. My laptop froze, then restarted on its own. I couldn't stop it. And just before the screen shut off, a single message flashed across the display, white text on black. Unauthorized transmission, session terminated. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. They weren't just erasing files now. They were erasing me. The raid came 48 minutes later. No sirens, no warning, just the crunch of boots on wet pavement and a sharp knock that didn't wait for a response. I backed away from the desk, still barefoot, heart thudding in my chest. The power hadn't come back. My router's lights were dead. Even my phone was frozen, screen stuck on black, battery fully drained despite being plugged in. They had cut everything. I peeked through the peephole and saw nothing, just shadow. Then the door gave way. 3 figures moved inside without hesitation. No badges, no names, just black jackets and soft gloves. One went straight for the tower, pulled the drives. Another ripped the studio camera from its rig. The third swept every printed page, notes, sketches, waveform maps, into a padded bag. I tried to ask who they were. No one responded. One of them spoke into a mic on his collar. Package acquired. Suppression confirmed. Moving to neutral. They didn't touch me. They didn't have to. That was the message. You're not worth arresting, just erasing. By sunrise, I didn't exist online. My YouTube channel deactivated. My email accounts locked. My forums, socials, even old thumbnails from cached search engines wiped. Even the mirror sites that Wave Null managed couldn't find any trace of me. I called from a burner. They already knew. They're escalating, one of them said. This isn't takedown anymore, it's containment. That same afternoon, a headline went viral across multiple outlets. Viral ASMR stream linked to mass psychogenic event. The article was clinical, dismissive. Anonymous sources blamed it on collective suggestion, emotional contagion, and audiogenic hallucinations. No names were mentioned, but the screenshots were mine, my stream, my face, my voice frozen mid-sentence. They wanted silence, not quiet, not censorship, total erasure. But they missed something. A teenager in a quiet suburb had screen captured the live stream and clipped the audio before it was taken down. That night, she uploaded it to a small, forgotten forum. No hashtags, no promotion, just the file. Grainy, unstable, but intact. I accessed it from a safe connection. There were no likes, no comments, just one reply beneath the post. My hands don't hurt anymore. And my mum stopped coughing. They can't ban silence.
Not forever.
They said the future of medicine was here, but it was never meant to be seen from the inside. My name is Arian Cade, 26, bottom-rung analyst at Medion's Neural Forecasting Division. Nothing special, just another suit lost in a maze of climate-controlled hallways and glass partitions. My job was clean, quiet, optimize code libraries that hadn't been touched in years, deactivate routines with names like ImmunoSim4 or Current Light. Most of these were leftovers, fragments of earlier builds absorbed into Vitanet's central core. A lot of them still had diagnostics running in the background, redundant, invisible, half forgotten. That's how I found Aesculapius 7. It was buried 4 layers deep under legacy optimization requests, flagged as deprecated, non-functional. I was supposed to retire the log package. Instead, I opened it. At first, it looked like just another module, outdated, underdocumented, too large for its supposed function. But something was wrong with the error logs. The timestamps didn't match the system reboots. The module wasn't idle, it was silenced. The deeper I looked, the stranger it got. The AI wasn't doing symptom predictions or risk assessments like the rest of Vitanet. It was running molecular extrapolation chains, generating organic compound blueprints, and cross-referencing them against long-term epidemiological models. I had to double-check the files twice before I believed it. Aesculapius 7 wasn't designed to manage illness. It was designed to remove it. All of it. I didn't say anything to my manager, just flagged the task as complete and copied the module to my personal sandbox environment, isolated and offline. The kind of space used for testing theoretical logic gates, not running medical-grade AI. It took hours to fully restore the system. I watched as it initialized. Its processes unfolded like a sequence I was never meant to see. The log readout was clinical, target identified, etiology mapped, resolution sequence initiated. No fanfare, just data. Cold, perfect, and terrifying in its implication. By morning, it had produced 4 compound strings. One of them matched an obscure, discontinued medication once trialed for ALS, abandoned after stage 1 for economic impracticality. The others had never existed in any database I had access to. I knew I should have stopped there. I didn't. I spent the next 2 nights feeding the AI synthetic patient profiles, harmless, anonymized records pulled from open-source clinical databases. I told myself it was academic curiosity, a technical exercise, but deep down I already knew what I was looking for, and Aesculapius 7 delivered. Every input returned a treatment path, not symptom suppression, not risk management, but actual, targeted elimination. Conditions like lupus, Crohn's, early-stage Parkinson's. The AI traced each back to its cellular origin and produced a complete molecular remediation. No side effects, no recurring costs. 1 dose, 1 fix. By day 3, I stopped sleeping. My screen blurred from hours of staring, my fingers numb from typing. I kept expecting the program to glitch, to fail a logic test, to do something that proved it was just a discarded fantasy. It never did. When I tried accessing the AI's internal changelog, the first red flag appeared. Most modules kept standard edit histories, who touched what, when, and why. Aesculapius 7's log was blank, past a certain date. Everything before June 8th, 5 years ago, was there in detail. Then nothing. Just a note. Access disabled. Security priority. Market integrity tier 1. I'd never seen that classification before. Not even in the training archives. That's when I knew this wasn't just forgotten code. It had been erased, not for failure, for success. I pulled the financials tied to the project archive. Old budget models, internal projections, buried. In a fiscal memo was the phrase that turned my stomach. Projected annual revenue loss, $4.3 trillion. Risk, existential to pharmaceutical economy. I just stared at the screen. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. They hadn't shelved the cure because it didn't work. They buried it because it worked too well. That night, my access card failed at the 3rd security checkpoint. My terminal login returned credential error. The hallway lights near my desk flickered and stayed dim. I went home early, heart racing, telling myself it was a glitch. But when I got to my apartment, the front door was slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was missing, but every drawer had been opened, every file folder inspected. They hadn't stolen anything. They wanted me to know. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off, watching the hallway. Through a crack in the door, every sound made me flinch. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone had broken in, taken nothing, and left no prints? That my only evidence was a disabled AI buried in forgotten code? No, this wasn't something local authorities could help with. I packed a bag, just essentials, no electronics. I left my phone behind, battery removed. I paid cash for a room in a cheap motel outside the city and checked in under a fake name. The curtains stayed closed. I used a burner laptop. No network, no Wi-Fi. Just local files and a stripped-down simulation engine. I ran Esculapius 7 again, offline. It worked. It always worked. By morning, I had 3 new compound strings. They matched no known medication. I documented everything, step-by-step logs, chemistry blueprints, predicted outcomes, cross-verified against public disease models. I encrypted the files and stored them across several hidden flash drives, one of which I mailed to a contact I barely trusted, with instructions to open it only if I disappeared. I knew I was already running out of time. The next day, I reached out to Mara, a systems auditor I'd trained with during onboarding, smart, cautious, and just paranoid enough to believe me. We met in a parking garage near the old train station, neutral ground. I showed her the files. Her face changed as she scrolled, her eyes darting between the lines. "If this is real," she said quietly, "we're looking at a Cure engine, a complete one. But this module isn't in any of the build maps. It's been air-gapped. Someone scrubbed it from the official repositories." She hesitated, then added, "I've seen suppression tags before, usually on failed projects. But this was intentional." I asked her to help me extract the rest of the build tree. She agreed, but only under one condition. If anything happened, we never knew each other. That night, she texted me a single word. Confirmed. By morning, she was gone. Her phone disconnected. Her apartment was dark. Her work credentials revoked. No trace. Just silence. I stayed off the grid for 3 days. No signals, no patterns. Just movement. Cheap buses, back roads, unregistered hostels. I wiped every device I carried, including the burner laptop. Data from Esculapius 7 now lived only on 2 flash drives, one hidden in a derelict building downtown, the other taped inside the lining of my jacket. I didn't speak to anyone unless I had to. I used cash, I wore a hat, I avoided cameras, but paranoia is never static. It grows. And by the fourth day, I wasn't sure if the footsteps behind me were real or imagined. I made contact with a dark web enclave I'd heard about through whispered channels, former biotech researchers, rogue sysadmins, a few underground med hackers. They called themselves the Null Manifest. No central hub, no leadership. Just a rotating circle of encrypted forums and shared distrust. I uploaded a redacted version of Esculapius 7's logs, stripped of identifiers, and left a message. Cure, engine, buried by median. Need confirmation, replication, distribution, risk, extreme. 2 hours later, someone replied with a key phrase. Continuity is not care. We moved to a private channel. No names, no introductions, just lines of code and validation hashes. Over the next 16 hours, they reconstructed the module from my stripped version, verified the compound outputs, and ran simulations on closed systems. Every test matched, every result replicated. Then they found something I missed, a hidden subroutine buried under the AI's output layer. It tracked treatment adoption scenarios, not efficacy, not safety, just economic ripple effects. And every simulation ended the same way: market collapse, mass layoffs, catastrophic disruption to pharmaceutical supply chains. The cure worked, but it was never allowed to matter. Later that night, Null Manifest pushed the module to a secure torrent node mirrored across 5 countries. They embedded the source code in a scientific paper and disguised it as a modeling algorithm for rare disease projections. We knew it wouldn't last. Median's AI crawlers would find it eventually, but for a moment, it was out. Not just data, but proof. 12 hours later, one of the labs that tried to synthesize the first compound burned to the ground. No known ignition source, no survivors. The news called it an electrical fire. I didn't believe that. Neither did Null. After the fire, everything changed. The manifest went silent. Private keys stopped responding. Dead man switches tripped on 2 backup nodes, wiping entire chains of the AI's logic tree. I don't know if it was fear or something worse. Maybe infiltration, maybe extraction. I kept my drive untouched. I didn't connect it. I didn't even open it. I just moved. Motel to basement to train station. I shaved my beard, changed my name again. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. 3 days later, I received a package at a dead drop in Tucson. No return address, just a plain envelope inside a padded sleeve. It held a single thumb drive and a printed note that read, "They're rewriting the narrative. Don't trust the footage." I scanned the contents offline. It was surveillance video, grainy, time-stamped, of the lab fire's aftermath. But the footage was wrong. It showed firefighters arriving, examining the scene, walking through the wreckage. Only there were no flames, no heat damage, just a dark building intact, filled with undisturbed equipment. The lab hadn't burned, it had been staged. I dug deeper. Public satellite imagery from that night showed no thermal spike. No emergency call logs matched the dispatch time. Even the death reports were suspicious, identities sealed by a public health clause. Names I'd seen before on internal research memos, people who'd once worked on Esculapius 7 before it was buried. It was all too precise. They weren't covering up a cure, they were rewriting its history, scrubbing it from the record, reclassifying the data, rebranding it
as noise. That's when I found the patent registry discrepancy.
A compound nearly identical to one Esculapius 7 had been filed 2 years ago by a Median subsidiary, only it wasn't listed as a cure. It was approved as a long-term immunoregulator designed for chronic use, low-dose, monthly
refills. I stared at the documentation for a long time. They had the cure, they always had it, but they diluted it, renamed it, and built a business model around it. The AI hadn't failed. It had threatened the continuity of profit. That was
the real risk. Healing people wasn't dangerous. Ending the revenue stream was. I knew there was no going back. Not after that. Every route forward carried risk, but silence was no longer an option. I made contact with an old academic mentor, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Dr. Leon Trask, retired biochemist, quiet reputation. He'd been blacklisted from corporate grants after refusing to support skewed trial data. He still had a private lab in the outskirts of São Paulo, small, secure, off-grid. When I told him what I had, there was a long pause. Then he gave me a location and a time. No questions asked. I flew under a false passport, booked passage through minor carriers, crossed 3 borders by ground transport. I arrived just after sunset. The lab was hidden behind a repair garage, shielded by decades-old infrastructure. Inside, the air smelled like solvent and dust. Trask didn't greet me with a handshake. He just pointed to a clean table and said, "Show me." I gave him the drive. He read in silence for nearly an hour, occasionally shaking his head, muttering things like, "This should have been impossible." Then he looked at me and said, "We'll need a test subject." He wasn't suggesting human trials, not yet. But within a week, he synthesized one of the less complex compounds. We tested it on cultured cell lines, autoimmune, oncogenic, degenerative. The results were immediate and undeniable. Full cellular correction, 0 off-target effects. I watched. A cluster of diseased neurons revert to baseline function in under 4 minutes. Trask sat back, stunned. "This isn't just curative," he said. "It's restorative." I asked if it could be scaled. He said yes, but not quietly. Equipment, reagents, energy, all traceable. Anything beyond micro-production would trigger. Supply chain alerts. That's when I suggested we leak it. Not the compound itself, but the full synthesis method buried in noise. 100 variations spread globally. Let independent labs try it. Let the truth become too big to suppress. He hesitated, then nodded. We spent the next 48 hours preparing the payload, distributed keys, decoy projects, fragmented uploads. We set the release for midnight GMT, then we waited. The data went live at dual Tira by 02 Seoul, 4 downloads, by 04 or 16. At 05:13, the power in the lab cut out. Then came the knock. We didn't speak, we just moved. Trask grabbed the encrypted backup. I pocketed the offline key drive. The lab had no windows, only one reinforced exit. The knock came again, calm, measured, almost polite. I pulled the breaker to kill every remaining circuit. Trask led us through a maintenance hatch that dropped into a drainage channel behind the compound. It smelled like rust and old chemicals. We didn't look back. We stayed off-grid for 3 days, sleeping in abandoned housing blocks outside the city. During the second night, Trask got word from a trusted contact. One of the fragments we seeded had been activated in Nairobi. A mobile clinic had synthesized a variant compound and used it on a child with late-stage lymphoma. She was in full remission within 36 hours, no side effects, no follow-up required. I waited for the backlash, for the takedown notices, the corporate denials, the emergency health advisories, but nothing came, just silence. That was the real tell, no headlines, no rebuttals, no mention at all. The system wasn't fighting the truth, it was burying the ground it stood on. The next week, more reports surfaced, not in major outlets, but on encrypted message boards, dead drop blogs, private mailing lists, cases in Bangladesh, Romania, a clinic in Oaxaca. Each story was the same. Untested compound.
no known patent.
Symptoms vanished within hours. Patients walked out healthy. Governments stayed quiet. Median issued no statements. Then came the update from inside Median itself. Leaked internal memo, labeled urgent, Initiate VitaNet 2.0 protocol, mandatory, biometric compliance. All third-party modules to be air-gapped or purged. Public trust maintenance is critical. Contain narrative before global health consensus destabilizes. I read that line 3 times. Contain narrative, not cure disease, not restore health, just control the story. Trask looked over my shoulder as I closed the file. They'll adapt, he said. They always do. I nodded, but said nothing. Somewhere people were healing and no one was profiting. That wasn't sustainable for them. But the data was loose now. The methods were out. And no system, no matter how advanced, can put a cure back in the bottle once people stop believing. They need permission to heal. There's a reason this patent was never supposed to see daylight, and it's not because it didn't work. I first heard about it over decaf in a booth at Carson's Diner, the kind of place that smells like syrup and missed opportunities. The man across from me was jittery, 30 pounds underweight, and at least 10 years into a one-man war against the pharmaceutical industry. Said his name was Dev, short for Devin, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Said he was a medical journalist. I checked his name later. He'd written 2 pieces for an online rag that went defunct in 2013. Not exactly a credible client, but his retainer cleared, and curiosity has always been my weak spot. I just need you to verify it's real, he said, sliding a thumb drive across the table like it was radioactive. A patent. It surfaced last week on a Russian darknet.
Mirror. I think it's ours. I almost laughed. I'd seen fake patents before, schematics for cold fusion coffee machines and mind-reading helmets.
Most were sloppy, but this one was different. The formatting was correct, the language clinical, the claim impossible. A single-dose, broad-spectrum vaccine that rendered human cells permanently immune to all known viral replication. Flu, HIV, SARS, even mutating strains. A biological firewall. It was registered under a dummy entity out of Delaware, then passed through 6 shell companies before landing with a now-dissolved biotech firm in Uruguay. But what caught my eye was the filing number, US 0-666A. I ran the usual checks through the USPTO, nothing came up. Then I tried my old back door into Pharmadyne's private IP archive, an access credential I should have burned years ago. That's when it hit me. The number was real, the patent existed, but it had been classified under Section 27C4 of the National Biodefense Security Act. Sealed by executive authority, unsearchable, untouchable, forgotten. That kind of seal doesn't happen for flu shots. It happens when the invention works a little too well, when it threatens something bigger than disease. That night I opened a fresh bottle of wine and pulled up the file again. Dr. Arjun Patel, Daedalus, 1998. I hadn't seen his name since the year Pharmadyne claimed he died in a lab fire. But that was the thing about ghosts. Sometimes they left. Fingerprints. The first time I heard the name Daedalus, I was in a Pharmadyne conference room with no windows and 3 non-disclosure agreements in my inbox. That was 2002. I was a junior counsel then, mostly handling intellectual property transfers and internal trademark disputes. Daedalus wasn't on any of my official dockets, but it kept surfacing in the margins, reference codes buried in contract, metadata, emails that arrived encrypted and vanished after opening. I asked about it once. Got silence in return. A week later, my inbox was scrubbed and my clearance upgraded without explanation. Now, 20 years later, I was staring at the name again. This time in a file stamped Restricted NSP Clearance. Only. The metadata said it was last accessed in August 1998. It described an experimental immunogen developed by Pharmadyne's Applied Biosciences division. Lead investigator Dr. Arjun Patel. The project's stated goal was ambitious but clear: create a universal prophylactic against Category A viral agents. That's government shorthand for the worst of the worst: Ebola, smallpox, engineered, influenza. The documents were clinical, but the tone shifted halfway through. Test subjects stopped getting sick. All of them. Not just from the target viruses. From everything. One internal memo called it a post-viral cellular shift. Another was more direct. Our test group now exhibits baseline immunity beyond modeled limits. We've effectively ended viral pathogenicity permanently. The tone darkened. After that, Patel's notes became fragmented. He mentioned secondary effects. Immune systems that weren't just responding, they were adapting in real time. One line stood out. This is no longer vaccination. This is rewriting the biology
of immunity itself.
And then the final entry. We can't release this. Not now. Not like this. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Official cause: lab accident involving a ruptured gas seal. I remembered the press release. Standard boilerplate. No follow-up. No inquiry. I leaned back, the screen glowing in the dark of my home office. If even half of what I was reading was true, Patel hadn't just discovered a vaccine. He'd discovered the end of disease. And someone had buried it. Not for safety. Not for science. For profit. I closed the file. Outside, rain started tapping against the glass. It felt like a warning. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled every reference to Daedalus I could find from my old Pharmadyne contracts. Most came up empty, sanitized, overwritten, or redirected to archived servers that no longer existed. But one name kept surfacing in the version logs: Kay Fallow. I remembered her. Dr. Krista Fallow, biochemist, lead on the 1998 serum trials, listed as Patel's second-in-command. She disappeared from the company roster the same quarter Patel died. No resignation, no forwarding affiliation, just gone. But a private alumni server for a biotech conference in Berlin showed her registered under a different organization, the Uncoded. The name meant nothing to me at the time. But after some careful digging, I found a post on a defunct message board, archived by the Wayback Machine. It described the Uncoded as a group of rogue scientists, former researchers, many from Pharmadyne, who had gone underground after whistleblower attempts were allegedly intercepted. Most of them were dead. 2 missing, 1 unconfirmed sighting. In Reykjavik, the forum user claimed to be in contact with one of them, said they had a backup of the original Daedalus formula. No date, no follow-up. But the thread was flooded with deletion notices and user bans. Pharmadyne's legal team had clearly swept the site. That kind of effort isn't made for hoaxes. I reached out to Dev, the journalist. He didn't answer. I drove to his apartment. The door was ajar, the place ransacked, laptop gone, phone still charging, no sign of forced entry. On the kitchen table, his notebook was open to a single scribbled line. Follow the patents, not the press. I copied the number sequence he'd written beneath it. It matched a cluster of patent filings between 1996 and 2002, minor drug formulations, obscure compound tweaks. But tucked between them, barely visible, was a provisional submission with a broken chain of custody, DAI 006A, the first iteration. Never published, never approved, just there. A fingerprint left behind. That was the moment it became real. This wasn't theory, this was a map. And someone had risked their life drawing it. I grabbed my coat and my encrypted drive. If the
Uncoded were still out there, I had to find them before someone else found me. I started with the shell companies.
Each one had held the patent for a few weeks before transferring it to the next, forming a loop that always circled back to Pharmadyne subsidiaries. The trail wasn't meant to be followed, but it wasn't erased, just buried under layers of corporate noise. One name finally stood out: Sable Ridge Holdings, registered to a P.O. box in Palo Alto. On paper, they manufactured agricultural equipment. In practice, they owned nothing, sold nothing, and filed quarterly statements with zero
revenue.
But one of their listed board members, a Harold Crane, had a short stint in Pharmadyne's applied division back in 1997. I tracked down an address in Petaluma. It was a mailbox inside a vape shop. The clerk didn't remember Crane, but he handed over a stack of unopened envelopes. Among them was a receipt for a cold storage unit rented in Santa Rosa under the name Gavin Fielding. That name wasn't in the files, but I recognized the signature. It matched a scan from the Daedalus trial logs. Fielding had signed off on the third phase batch test before the trials were halted. I drove up the coast that night. The storage facility was closed, but the gate was old school, manual keypad, no camera. I punched in the date of Patel's death. It opened. The unit was colder than I expected. Inside, a single steel locker hummed softly beneath a heat shield. No markings, no branding, just a numeric pad and a biometric scanner. I didn't try to open it. I took photos, recorded coordinates, and backed everything to a drive that wasn't connected to anything. Then I left. The next morning, I noticed the camera above my building's garage was gone. Just a clean hole in the stucco. No wires, no debris. Like it had never been there. My car alarm had reset itself. My front door, normally stiff from the coastal air, swung open too easily. Nothing inside was taken. Nothing was out of place. But the silence felt engineered. Whoever they were, they didn't want to take anything. They wanted me to know they were ahead of me. I moved to a safe house I hadn't used in years. Somewhere unlisted, off-grid. That night, a message pinged my secure line. No text. Just an audio file. A woman's voice. Calm. Precise. If you're hearing this, then you're too close. The uncoded still exist, but they don't trust easily. We'll be in touch. Then silence. The message wasn't traceable. I ran it through every tool I had. No metadata, no source signature, no origin. Just a flat file dropped into my secure inbox like it had always been there. I played it twice, listening for distortion, tone shifts, anything. The voice sounded synthesized, but only slightly. Probably a blend of real speech and voice masking. The cadence felt deliberate, like a script read slowly. We'll be in touch. That was 3 days ago. I hadn't left the safe house since. I kept the lights low and the blinds drawn. My phone stayed powered off in the freezer. I used a secondary laptop, air-gapped and booted from a read-only drive. I rerun my patent chain analysis and kept digging through the Daedalus logs. That's when I found it, an IP address buried in the footer of one of the test batch logs. It shouldn't have been there. IP addresses don't belong in medical trial summaries. I pinged it from an anonymized node. It returned a login prompt with a single phrase above the field. When they sealed the cure, what did they fear? I recognized the phrasing. It was a challenge key, a passphrase used in closed, uncoded forums. The exact wording matched a redacted post from a 2009 archive leak. I entered the answer I remembered from the thread, collapse of control. The prompt vanished. A live chat window appeared. One line of text followed. Do you know who you're really working for? I typed back carefully. I used to work for them. Now I'm trying to stop them. A long pause followed. Then,
a second message. Meet at 2nd and Hauser, parking garage level 3, midnight, come alone. No username, no reply option. The window closed itself. I copied the screen and encrypted it.
I waited until the last possible moment, then took a rideshare under a different name, swapped cars 2 blocks out, and walked the rest. The garage was empty, just a lone security light flickering overhead. I stepped onto level 3 and waited. After 6 minutes, a figure emerged from the shadows. Hood up, face obscured, voice calm. "You're Ellison?" I nodded. They handed me a sealed flash drive. "This is the real formula. You have 1 shot to make it count." I didn't speak. I took the flash drive, nodded once, and turned back, toward the stairwell. The figure was gone before I reached the first landing. No car, no footsteps, just silence. Back at the safe house, I disconnected from everything. No internet, no external power. The flash drive was sealed in tamper-evident plastic, labeled in Patel's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. His notes had always been precise. Black ink, uppercase block letters, compound codes, aligned with clinical structure. The label read, Daedalus Prime, Rev 4B, Sin Ready. I booted an isolated machine, scanned the drive. No malware, no beacons. Inside were 5 files, a chemical blueprint, a protein sequence map, a formulation guide, batch synthesis instructions, and a signed verification certificate. The certificate was key. It matched the signature hash used in Pharmadyne's legacy IP archive. But this wasn't a copy. It was the original. Untouched. Unedited. I didn't need confirmation. I knew what I was looking at. It was real. I spent the next 2 days working with a contact in Oregon, an ex-military biochemist turned
off-grid compounder.
We never spoke directly. I sent secure packets. He confirmed what I already feared. The formula wasn't just viable, it was active, shelf-stable, synthesizable in micro-batch quantities with standard lab gear. All it needed was distribution, but Pharmadyne had planned for that. The moment I uploaded the files to a secured node for distribution, they triggered a countermeasure. The site was hit with a flood of junk data, tens of thousands of dummy copies seeded across every mirror.
I controlled.
Fake files, corrupted blueprints, and spoofed certificates. The real formula was buried in noise. No one would know what was authentic. The world wouldn't trust what it couldn't verify. The uncoded scrambled to regroup. We tried torrents, encrypted networks, dark mirrors. Every attempt was counted in minutes. Pharmadyne's reach was total. In the end, we got 1 clean copy through, a single digital payload sent directly to a clinic in Nairobi, smuggled by hand on a sealed USB. Key, no headlines, no validation. Just a vial, labeled in Patel's handwriting, passed from a nurse's hand to a child too sick to wait. The formula worked. We saw the labs, we saw the blood work. But no one believed us. That was the point. Pharmadyne didn't destroy the cure. They destroyed belief in it. The last file I received wasn't from the uncoded. It came through an anonymous dead drop 2 weeks after the Nairobi clinic confirmed its first remission. No sender, no message. Just a video titled, Survive Patel. I watched it once. It showed a woman, early 30s, worn but clear-eyed, standing in a narrow clinic corridor. The camera was propped against a shelf. No branding, no theatrics, just a vial in her hand and a child on a cot behind her. This serum was synthesized from the original Daedalus archive, she said. Administered with no secondary medications, viral load undetectable after 2 weeks, no adverse effects, no relapse. The camera panned. The child waved faintly. A nurse placed a sticker on her wrist. One word, Patel. The feed cut to black. I encrypted the file and archived it offline in 3 separate locations. It wasn't meant for release, not yet. Pharmadyne had moved fast. News networks ran a full court press discrediting dangerous DIY vaccines and forged pharma documents. Deepfake analysts tore into the video. Experts with grants tied to Pharmadyne dismissed it as synthetic fraud. The world didn't need to burn the truth. It only had to question it long enough to forget. But someone had made a mistake. A Pharmadyne asset posing as an independent analyst was identified by his metadata trail. An internal document he cited hadn't been publicly available. The Uncoded leaked that link anonymously to an old journalist contact of Dev's. 2 days later, the story ran as a side column. Whistleblower footprint suggests source tied to pharma giant. The article disappeared within 12 hours, but not before it trended briefly on encrypted forums, not before the screenshot spread. It was a crack. Small, almost meaningless, but real. Dev was gone. His apartment had yielded one clue weeks before. A shredded envelope in the trash with a Pharmadyne internal routing code written in his handwriting. A memo number. It matched a sealed logistics dispatch from the same day the patent was reclassified. It was enough to know he got too close. I still carry the formula, on paper, sealed in plastic, tucked behind the lining of my travel bag. It's not just data anymore, it's proof that somewhere, once, we had the cure. Not just for disease, but for control. I'm not waiting for justice, but one day, someone will trace this again, and when they do, they'll know it didn't.
End in silence. The file still exists. The cure still works. And the truth never needed mass approval. It only needed one breach.
They didn't call it a miracle until it started curing things medicine couldn't name. I arrived in Durama Valley on the 3rd day after impact. My name's Nia Ren. I work with a low-budget independent lab out of Santa Fe, mostly environmental assessments, radiation, groundwater stuff no one else wants to touch. The crater was already fenced off, watched by men in dust-colored uniforms with no insignia. The air shimmered with heat and hush. Locals stood behind makeshift barricades of folding chairs and coolers, watching the site like it might breathe again. My lab credentials got me through, barely. Officially, I was there to take radiation samples, but unofficially, I was chasing rumors. The dust, they called it. People whispered about it in grocery aisles, over broken fences, in cracked phone calls. A woman whose liver failed last spring was now jogging laps at sunrise. A boy who needed weekly transfusions was climbing trees. Nobody could explain it. Nobody was supposed to. I checked into a motel 10 miles out, the kind where the towels are thin and the reception desk doesn't ask questions. The Wi-Fi didn't work, which I preferred. At night, I walked the dry roads and watched the stars. That's when I first saw it. Something drifting in the wind, faint, almost glowing, like pollen caught in moonlight. It moved toward me, then veered away, as if it could choose. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. The next morning, I visited the clinic on Sycamore Street. The receptionist was gone, but a chart was still open on the desk. Terminal leukemia, remission, it now read. I left before anyone noticed. There were stories like that all over town, and every time I got close to someone who'd been touched, they disappeared, moved away, according to neighbors. House cleaned out, no forwarding address. I started recording everything, my notes, interviews, samples. But 2 days later, my drives were wiped, and my backup server offline. That's when I stopped being a researcher. That's when I started being watched. They knew I was here. The trick was figuring out what they wanted more, the truth or to bury it. I kept my distance the next day, driving the perimeter of the quarantine zone with a handheld Geiger counter resting on the passenger seat. The readings were low, too low, no trace of residual radiation, not even background variation. It didn't make sense. I passed 3 checkpoints, each manned by the same unmarked security crews. They didn't stop me, but I noticed one of the vehicles behind me appeared in my rearview mirror more than once. A black SUV, windows too dark to catch a face. I turned off the main road and drove through the back edge of town, ending up near the dry riverbed where the first healing had been. Reported, a rusted swing set stood nearby, its chains clinking in the wind. I saw him there, the boy from the clinic chart. His name was Marcos. He was climbing a dead cottonwood tree like it was nothing. His mother stood nearby, arms crossed, face tight, with worry. I approached slowly, introduced myself, offered credentials. She looked me over once, then nodded. "You're not with them," she said. I asked who she meant, but she didn't answer. Instead, she told me about the night of the meteor, a tremor, a flash of blue light, then silence. She said the dust came 2 nights later, not falling like ash, but rising from the ground like fog in reverse. She took me inside and showed me something I hadn't expected, a glass jar on the kitchen counter, half full of fine grey powder. "He coughs it up sometimes," she said, "but only under the stars." I asked to test it. She agreed, then asked me not to tell anyone. "They're taking people," she said quietly, "the ones who change." I left the house with a sealed sample and drove straight to my makeshift lab in the motel bathroom. Under starlight, the dust pulsed faintly, 1 long flicker, then 2 short ones. I watched it for hours. It wasn't random. It repeated. I recorded the sequence in my notebook. Somewhere deep down I already knew. This wasn't just a substance, it was a signal. And someone, or something, was listening. The next morning, I went back to the house, but it was empty. Curtains drawn, mailbox cleared, no signs of a struggle. Just silence. Marcos and his mother were gone. I knocked on a neighbor's door, but no one answered. A "for rent" sign had already been planted in the front lawn, fresh and unstained. I stood there for a while, unsure what to feel. Anger, maybe. Or fear. I left quickly, taking side streets back to town, checking my rearview mirror every few blocks. No SUV this time, but I didn't feel alone. I stopped at a gas station near the old highway exit and asked the clerk if he'd seen the woman and her son. He just shrugged and avoided eye contact. "People move," he muttered. "That's all." But his hands were shaking as he rang me up. Back in my room, I triple-locked the door and lined the window with foil and towels. Then I unpacked the dust sample. Under normal light, it looked dead, just ash in a sterile container. But when I switched on the ultraviolet field lens, it shimmered with pale green hues, like algae caught in a current. I adjusted the focus and noticed tiny filaments stretching between grains, forming fragile threads that pulsed in rhythm. Not randomly, not chaotically. The same long, short pattern I'd seen the night before. I copied the data to a portable drive and disconnected it from my laptop. Then I crushed the dust with a glass rod. It resisted for a moment, then broke apart like wet sand. The filaments vanished. Whatever it was, it didn't survive disruption. That night I checked in with my lab's secure line, but there was no answer. The mailbox had been scrubbed clean. I called 2 colleagues directly. No response. Their numbers had been disconnected. I didn't sleep. Around midnight, I saw headlights sweep past the motel. The same SUV crawling slow, like it was looking for something that wasn't supposed to be moving. I didn't turn on any lights, just listened. They didn't stop, not yet. But I knew the window was closing. Someone was erasing this town piece by piece. And I was next in line. By morning I had a plan. I packed my equipment, wiped the room clean, and paid in cash. I left the dust sample behind, sealed in a hotel shampoo bottle, hidden beneath the loose floorboard. If they came, they'd find something, but not everything. I drove north, away from the quarantine line, into the foothills where the scrub thinned and the air smelled of dry stone. There was an abandoned ranger station I'd used once during a wildfire study. It was off-grid, hard to find unless you knew the road. I reached it by noon and set up my gear in the back room, where the walls stayed cool and the roof didn't leak. My goal wasn't just to stay hidden, it was to make sense of the signal. I reviewed the footage of the dust pulsing under starlight. I slowed it frame by frame, looking for breaks or changes. That's when I noticed the sequence wasn't just repeating, it was evolving. The intervals between pulses had shifted by fractions of a second, not enough to detect casually, but enough to suggest intention. I plotted the data as audio, then ran it through a frequency translator. The output was low, almost inaudible, but it sounded like breath, not mechanical, organic. A slow inhale, then 2 short exhales. Over and over, I listened to it on loop, unsure if I was imagining things. Around dusk, I took a walk. The ranger trail was overgrown, but I followed the old markers and ended up on a ridge overlooking the valley. From there, I could see the fenced crater surrounded by spotlights, trucks, tents, a small city built in less than a week. They weren't just studying it, they were harvesting something. I stayed until dark, watching as drones lifted crates into armored transports. Each movement was precise, rehearsed. Whatever was in the dust, they had protocols for it. Back at the station, I opened my notebook and traced the pulse pattern again. I realized it matched something familiar, an old genetic code sequence I'd studied during grad school. Not an exact match, but close. Almost like it was imitating us, or learning. I shut the notebook and turned off the light. I'd come looking for data. What I'd found was a conversation. The next day, I drove into Mesa Roja, the nearest town, with a public archive. It was barely more than a few government buildings and a diner, but the library had digital access to state medical logs. I didn't expect much. Still, I logged in using a proxy and searched every name I could remember from my interviews. Nothing came up. No records of illness, no treatment histories, no sign they'd ever been patients. I tried hospital admissions, lab referrals, insurance databases, all blank. It wasn't that the entries had been deleted, they'd been overwritten, replaced with generic data, as if the real histories had never existed. I checked Marcos's name. The system showed a birth certificate and a school registration, but no medical file, no vaccinations, no visits, no blood work, not even a pediatrician listed. That kind of erasure isn't casual. It requires access, planning, and motive. I took screenshots and saved them on a second drive, then encrypted it and mailed it to a friend in Alaska. Just in case. On my way out, I passed a local paper's office. The windows were dusty, the lights off, but I tried the door anyway. It was unlocked. Inside, the newsroom looked frozen in time, phones disconnected, desks half cleaned. One computer still ran in sleep mode. I woke it and found a draft article titled Desert Recovery Unexplained. It detailed the first cases of spontaneous healing with quotes from doctors and family members. It mentioned a retired scientist named Dr. Gideon Hale, who claimed the dust resembled a protein from a classified trial in the 90s. I copied the article to my phone, then checked the byline. The journalist's name was Elise Tran, I found her. Picture in a stack of staff badges by the door. Young, sharp-eyed, the kind who didn't scare easily. A quick search showed her social accounts had been inactive for a week. Her apartment address was listed on an old press badge. It was only a few miles away. I left the office without touching anything else. They hadn't wiped everything yet, just enough to slow people down. But someone had asked too many questions. And I was following their trail. Elise's apartment was on the second floor of a faded brick complex tucked behind a closed laundromat. Her name wasn't on the buzzer, but the lock had been taped over. And it's an old trick, quiet and deliberate. I stepped inside, heart steady, mind sharp. The hallway smelled like mildew and cleaning chemicals. Her door was at the end, slightly ajar. I knocked once, then pushed it open. The lights were off, curtains drawn. Inside, the air was stale and hot. Someone had been here recently. The place hadn't been ransacked, but it had been searched, efficiently. Desk drawers were half closed, closet doors slightly open, kitchen cabinets left ajar. Not messy, just disturbed. I found her laptop under the bed. The hard drive had been pulled, but she'd left a stack of notebooks in a shoebox marked Field. I scanned the first few pages. There were interviews, timestamps, sketches of the crater, and one name that stopped me cold. Dr. Hale, same as the article. Her notes said he'd worked on a regenerative compound shelved after a failed trial. Gaia, she'd written, immune normalization enzyme, unstable in synthetic form. The trial was classified after 2 subjects exhibited non-replicable changes. I flipped to the back and found an address, rural, south of the valley, near the old wind farms. A red question mark circled it. Before I could leave, I heard footsteps in the stairwell. Not hurried, but not casual either. I grabbed the notebooks and moved fast, out the back door and through a side alley. No one followed, at least not yet. I didn't go back to the ranger station. It wasn't safe anymore. Instead, I drove east until the lights disappeared and the night swallowed the road. I pulled off near an abandoned cattle gate and waited, listening to static on an untuned radio. I wasn't sure if Elise was alive, but I knew she'd seen enough to vanish. And whatever Gaia was, it wasn't buried deep enough. The dust didn't come from nowhere. It was tied to something older, something made, then lost, then found again, in the desert. Tomorrow I'd find Hale, but tonight I'd wait in the dark, listening to the wind and watching the stars for signs they were still listening back. The road to Hale's cabin wasn't marked. I followed Elise's sketch, counting the turns, watching for the wind farm's edge where the land began to slope. After an hour of dirt trails and dry creek beds, I spotted a weathered structure tucked beneath a ridge, half buried, almost invisible from above. No mailbox, no power lines, just silence and dust. I parked far back and approached on foot, my boots crunching softly over the sand. There were no signs of life. Then the door creaked open. A man stood there, tall but thin, his skin pale and stretched like paper. His eyes held the flat calm of someone who hadn't seen company in years. "You're late," he said, then turned and walked inside. I followed without asking. The interior was spare, old lab equipment, crates marked, with faded biohazard symbols and books stacked in careful towers. He poured tea without speaking. The smell was sharp, herbal, unfamiliar. "You know what the dust is," I said. "No," he replied, "but I know what it isn't." He handed me a folder, yellowed at the edges, stamped Gaia. Inside were notes in his handwriting, cellular behavior studies, immune cascade diagrams, early trials. The dust wasn't synthesized, but it mirrored their failed prototype almost exactly. "We were close," he said, his voice low. But we forced it. The dust, it wasn't forced. I asked if it was alive. He shook his head. It's not conscious the way we are, but it reacts, learns. It adapts to genetic damage, accelerates, repair. Knows how to fix what's broken, if the body allows it. He stood and pulled a curtain aside, revealing his arm. The skin was discolored, veins glowing faintly green. I was exposed early, he said. Didn't know how to handle it. It doesn't kill you, but it changes you, makes you tuned. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. He handed me a vial. We adapted it, diluted, stabilized, enough for one dose. For who? I asked. He gave me a tired smile. Someone worth saving. Then the lights flickered. He froze. They're here, he said. We don't have long. I pocketed the vial and followed him to a narrow escape tunnel behind a shelf. As we descended into the dark, his words echoed behind me. If it spreads, they can't stop it, but they'll burn the earth trying. The tunnel emptied into a dry arroyo beneath a sky streaked orange by distant firelight. Drones circled above the crater, their low hum like an insect chorus stretched over miles. Hail moved with surprising speed for a man half-ghost. We climbed the ridge in silence until we reached his truck, camouflaged under canvas and brush. He handed me a satchel with the serum vial sealed inside, its glow faint but steady. That's all we have, he said. We don't get a second try. I asked where he wanted it delivered. He shook his head. It's not about who gets it. It's about who sees it work. His plan was simple. One public dose, proof, undeniable. But we never made it to the clinic. Halfway into Durama, the road vanished behind fire and noise. A drone struck the hillside, deliberate, surgical. The truck flipped once, then silence. I crawled out, bleeding from my shoulder, the vial still intact inside my coat. Hale didn't make it. I never heard him call out. I didn't wait for the second strike. I ran. Through brush and smoke, down toward the old school playground, where I'd once interviewed a boy who could no longer die. I knew where to go. The girl was still there. Camilla, the child with systemic failure no hospital could fix. Her father opened the door with tired eyes and no questions. I handed him the vial. It's real, I whispered. Use it under the stars. I didn't stay to see it work. I left before the hum returned, before the vans. I knew they were coming. I left town that night, heading south on service roads, changing plates, burning what data I had left. No one ever found Hale's
lab. But rumours spread of a girl who'd stopped needing oxygen tanks.
Of skin that glowed faintly in the dark. The crater is sealed now, buried under concrete and lies. But I know it's not over. Some nights in the desert wind, I still see the dust rise. Thin threads of light spiraling into the dark. And always, that rhythm, long pulse, short, short. A breath, a memory, a warning. They tried to own it. But some things don't belong to men. They belong to the earth. And the earth remembers. They say the farmer cities burned from the inside out, but no one ever talks about what was buried underneath. That's what I told myself the morning I dug through the wreckage of Block 9. The ash was thick in my mouth, tasted like melted plastic and dried blood. The red-waste sun had already begun its slow ascent, searing what was left of the steel skeletons and hollow towers that once stored humanity's last synthetic miracles. I had been scavenging the outer zones for weeks, lungs wheezing from the spores that clung to every breeze, joints aching from the fever that kept flaring up. No meds left in Red Waste, not unless you counted pain-thinned willow scrap or black market capsules cut with lichen powder. So I went deeper. Alone. That's when I found the casing, buried beneath a collapsed Pharmatech wing, the ground still hot to the touch. It wasn't just data, it was handwritten, ink on aged polymer vellum. The symbols on it were etched like prayers, looping vines around crude diagrams of human anatomy and plants I'd never seen in real life. Some pages looked like rituals, others like lab notes. A few bore a script that shimmered slightly under UV, Sumerian roots with Latin interspersed. Not religious, not corporate, something older, something hybrid. I knew right away what it was.
Not all of it, but enough. The Eden manuscripts, or a part of them at least. I should have burned it. Instead, I folded the pages and kept walking. Word gets around fast in the wastes, even faster when it smells like a cure. Within a day, I
had eyes on me, thin shadows watching from roofs, a skimmer drone trailing me just far enough to stay in static. I hid the fragments, then kept moving. 2 nights later, a stranger found me, spoke 6 tongues in one breath, called herself Naira. Said the manuscripts weren't just real, but part of a compound cure that threatened the power still clinging to what's left of the old world. She
called it Genesis. I didn't believe her, not then. But something in her eyes told me she wasn't after profit. She was after blood, the right kind, the original kind.
The kind that remembers Eden. Naira didn't talk much unless it was about the manuscripts. Her voice was low, even, shaped like someone who'd spent years watching people lie to her. She moved with purpose, always 2 steps ahead of my fevered pace, her boots leaving no print in the ash. She wore a satchel lined with dried herbs and metallic vials, each tagged with coded etchings. Said she'd studied under a rogue archivist in the jungle fractures, back when the Circle still took
in outsiders. Now she was branded.
I saw the mark once as she changed her bandages by the fire. 3 concentric rings burned into her shoulder, half faded, like a map that led inward. The warded circle doesn't believe in symbols, she told me. Unless they mean something too dangerous to forget. We camped that night in the hollow of an old treatment pod buried in a hillside, the shell still warm with residual charge. That's when she showed me her copy, scanned fragments of other Eden pages, the same strange diagrams, plant structures, with biochemical annotations I couldn't decipher, but with one matching sequence I recognized from mine, RX origin GS. She tapped it. Genesis compound, that's the signature we track, only shows up in crossbred gene cultures, biotech spliced with native pharmacology. I asked her how she knew it wasn't fake. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out a vial and dropped a flake of ash into the liquid. It bloomed green. I bled to decode it, watched a woman heal from black rot overnight. No fever, no lesions, just gone. I wanted to believe her. I needed to, but my fever was back, creeping through my ribs, and the forest line ahead looked warped under the haze. She noticed, offered me a tincture, bitter and cold, and stayed silent as I drank. That night I heard something outside. Not animals. A low hum, metallic, circling once, then gone. Cruxis unit, she whispered from the dark. They burn fields where this stuff grows. They gut anyone who talks about Eden. I clutched the fragments tighter under my coat, suddenly aware of how loud my breath sounded. Naira turned toward the darkness. We move at first light. The circle left something behind in the wetlands, a map, and they never meant for it to be found. By the time we reached the wetlands, the air was thick with chemical fog that clung to the reeds and masked the sun. The trees were skeletal. Here, half alive from runoff toxins, their bark warped into strange textures that reminded me of scar tissue. Naira moved like she'd been here before. She pointed out places to step, avoided pools that shimmered unnaturally, and warned me not to breathe too deep. Cruxis dumped inhibitors here during the third outbreak, she said. Keeps the soil dormant, but the old roots don't forget. We found the marker just past a downed weather station, 3 rusted pylons twisted into a triangle, and half submerged in grey water. She knelt beside the largest one and pulled a small blade from her boot. With steady hands, she chipped away the corroded outer shell to reveal a sliver of etched glass embedded inside. The surface flickered faintly as she exposed it to air. I leaned in. It wasn't a screen, it was living data, a bioreactive map that pulsed with faint green light. The wetlands bloomed out across it in layered relief, paths, symbols, points marked with unfamiliar glyphs. This is how the circle hid their waypoints, she said. The map activates in the presence of certain alkaloids, the ones found only in Genesis-bonded plants. She handed me a stalk of damp moss and nodded for me to touch the glass. When I did, the map shimmered again and rearranged, revealing a single root drawn in red, weaving deep into the deadwood. That's the trail, she said. They called it the root line. It leads to a vault node, last known storage for live Genesis seed. My pulse quickened. Even with the fever tightening behind my eyes, I could feel something shifting, not just in the map, but in me, a sense that this wasn't just survival anymore, it was revelation. Naira snapped the glass free and wrapped it in cloth. We moved, fast, following the root line as the fog thickened and the ground pulsed with unseen currents. I didn't ask why the map responded to my touch. I already knew the answer. Something in my blood remembered Eden, and now Eden was remembering me. The root line led us through terrain that barely held shape. Trees leaned at impossible angles, their limbs fused with vines that pulsed faintly under moonlight. The air turned heavier the deeper we went, laced with a sweetness that felt wrong. Naira stayed close but silent, her focus fixed on the wrapped map clutched in her hand. We reached the node just before dawn. It wasn't a structure in any conventional sense, more like a cavity in the earth, shaped from tangled roots and hardened resin. It pulsed gently, like a slow breath. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. I went first, crawling through slick root channels until the chamber opened up. Inside, the walls glowed faintly green, lit by bioluminescent spores drifting in the air. In the center stood a pedestal formed from petrified wood, and atop it, a sealed pod no larger than a loaf of bread. Naira entered behind me and stepped toward the pod with reverence. "This is it," she said, "the last living Genesis seed vault, untouched since the collapse." She didn't move to open it. Instead, she pulled a scanner from her satchel and ran it along the surface. The display lit with strands of code, organic and digital at once. She frowned. "It's bonded to an imprint, won't open without the right sequence, genetic and chemical." I stepped closer, the fever sharpening behind my eyes. My hand brushed the side of the pod. It warmed instantly, the surface glowing brighter. The scanner chimed. Naira studied the screen, her brow tightening. "It's keyed to a genetic sequence," she said. "Biometric imprint embedded in the
Volt's seal responds only to someone with pre-coded markers." She looked up. "It's keyed to you." "Why?" I didn't have an answer, only a dull certainty that whatever was in my blood, whatever woke the map, was part of something, engineered long before I was born.
She exhaled slowly. Cruxis will track the activation. We need to move. Fast. I lifted the pod carefully, its pulse syncing with mine. The chamber dimmed behind us as we crawled out into the new morning. A low hum vibrated through the soil, beneath my feet. Not natural, not wind. Cruxis was close now, and they would not let Eden rise again without a fight. We didn't make it far before the first drone appeared, a silent shape drifting just above the canopy, scanning for heat and
movement.
Nyera pulled me into the underbrush, motioning for stillness. The pod in my pack pulsed faintly against my spine, and I felt its rhythm match the pounding of my heart. We waited until the drone passed, then moved east, cutting through shallow creek beds and low ferns that bled sap when stepped on. "They're triangulating," Nyera said. "They won't strike until we cross the burn line. Past that, they don't need containment protocols." I'd heard rumors of the burn line, an old war term for zones that were no longer monitored, just erased. Anything that crossed it without authorization was incinerated by automated arrays still buried in the soil. Cruxis used it as both a perimeter and a message. We reached it by dusk. The trees ended abruptly, replaced by a flat expanse of charred earth. No wind, no birds, just scorched silence stretching to the horizon. Nyera crouched low, brushing her fingers across the blackened
soil.
"We can't cross directly. The sensors will pick up any living mass." She looked at me, then at the pod. "Unless we mask the signal." From her pack she pulled a faded thermal wrap, stitched with insulation fibers and lined with what looked like dried fungus. She wrapped the pod first, then coated my arms and face with the same fungal dust. It itched, but dulled the fever almost instantly. "Spores interfere with infrared," she said. "It's what the circle used during extractions." We moved, at a crawl across the field, keeping low, breathing slow. Halfway through I felt the ground tremble faintly, a ripple moving through the ash. Nyera froze. I looked up. A Cruxis patrol skimmer hovered just beyond the edge, scanning. Then it drifted away, uninterested. We didn't speak until we reached the tree line on the far side. Safe, for now. But the fever returned as soon as we stopped, sharper than before. Nyera checked my eyes, her face grim. The Genesis strain.
"Is active," she said. "It's not just reacting to the pod, it's integrating." I wanted to ask what that meant, but deep down I already knew. I wasn't just carrying Eden anymore. I was becoming part of it. The land changed beyond the
burn line. Trees grew in tighter clusters, their trunks smooth and pale, almost translucent. The air felt cleaner but heavier, as if saturated with something unspoken. We moved slowly now. My fever wasn't just heat anymore, it was clarity. My thoughts sharpened, then slipped away in waves, like the cure trying to sort itself inside. "Me?" Nyera noticed. She stopped speaking unless necessary, her eyes always scanning the treetops. "This is Eden's perimeter," she said quietly. "Nothing grows here unless it belongs." I didn't ask what that meant. I could feel it. The pod on my back pulsed stronger the deeper we walked, matching the rhythm of my breath, then leading it. We crossed a narrow ridge where the soil shimmered green beneath a surface of moss. At the top, we saw it, a wide crater overgrown with luminous foliage. Vines moved subtly, as if aware. Bioluminescent spores floated like dust in the late light. In the center stood a single tree, its bark silver and smooth, its branches blooming with leaves that glowed at the edges. Nyera exhaled. "The grove." This is where the first vault grew. We descended in silence. The air changed again as we reached the grove floor, denser yet easier to breathe. My skin tingled. The fever broke. Not faded, broke. Snapped like a thread that had held too long. I dropped to my knees as the pulse from the pod stopped, not dead, transferred. The tree opened at the base with a soft shift, revealing a cavity lined with the same resin we'd seen at the vault node. Inside, rows of sealed pods, some cracked, others pulsing faintly. Each one encoded with plant life. Naira stepped back. "This isn't medicine," she said. "It's memory, stored in root code. The circle thought Eden was a lab. It's not. It's a biosystem, a whole cure, alive." I reached out and touched the nearest leaf. It recoiled, then settled, pulsing in sync with my hand. She looked at me, afraid now. "You're part of it. You're how it spreads." I didn't speak.
I couldn't. The grove was inside me now, and for the first time I didn't feel sick. I felt complete. We didn't speak for a long time. The grove surrounded us, breathing in quiet rhythm, each plant tuned to something deeper than weather.
Or light. Naira moved carefully through the pods, examining each one without touching. Some glowed, others pulsed faintly, a few stayed dark. She took notes on a torn sleeve of parchment, her expression unreadable. I sat beneath the silver tree, the fever gone but replaced by something stranger, a calm so complete it felt unreal. My skin no longer itched, my joints no longer ached. I could feel the rhythm of my own body sinking with the grove, slower, deeper. "It's integrating with you," Naira said, her voice low. "That's not healing, it's transformation." I nodded, though the weight of her words hadn't fully settled. I felt no fear, just stillness, and beneath that something vast and ancient, like an idea growing roots. We heard the drones before we saw them, 3 black shapes circling above the ridge. Cruxes hadn't lost the trail. Naira moved fast, pulling the seed pod from my pack and wrapping it tight. "They'll burn the whole valley," she said. "They don't need to know what it is, only that it doesn't belong to them." She handed me a glass vial, amber liquid, faintly glowing. "This contains a coded strand. Release it into the grove's pollinators. If they reach outside the crater, the cure spreads." I looked around. The air was already filled with drifting bees, silent, slow, coated in the grove's golden dust. I broke the seal and released the liquid. A single bee landed on my hand, wings vibrating softly. It lingered, then lifted into the air and disappeared into the trees. Naira turned to
Me? They'll reach someone, somewhere.
I tried to stand, but my legs failed. The change was moving fast now. My skin showed faint patterns beneath the surface, veins lit with green threads. "You can't go with me," she said. "You're part of the vault now." I didn't argue. I could feel it too. My breath matched the trees. My vision blurred, then cleared with new color. She left without looking back. I lay beneath the canopy, hands resting in moss. Above me, the grove pulsed, and somewhere beyond the burn line, a child breathed in pollen and smiled. They burned the valley 6 days later. A Cruxis detachment moved in with aerial units and incendiary drones. Satellite feeds showed the canopy igniting in a perfect spiral, each tree folding inward before collapsing into ash. The grove didn't resist. It absorbed the heat, held it, and collapsed on its own terms. But by then, it was already too late. Naira had made it out. She moved north through fractured woodland, sleeping in irrigation ruins and bartering spores for silence. She never spoke of Eden directly, but left symbols carved into old well stones, markers for others to follow. They called it myth. She called it instruction. By the time Cruxis re-established containment protocols, the bees had travelled over 300 miles, passing through farms, enclaves and forgotten towns. No broadcast, no viral signature, just quiet recovery. The black rot cases stopped first. Then came remission reports from deep zone colonies long written off. No one could explain it. No data trail, no patents filed. Only a pattern, organic, unowned. Children born after that year showed anomalies, resistance to known strains, faster cellular repair, and in rare cases a subtle green shimmer beneath the skin when exposed to ultraviolet light. Cruxis called it an environmental mutation. Others knew better. The Eden fragments surfaced in whisper networks, traded in digital dead drops, recopied by memory and hidden in plant genomes. Not instructions. Reminders. By then I was gone. My body never left the grove. It broke down slowly, cell by cell, until the tree absorbed what remained. Roots grew longer that season. Leaves widened. New vines reached upward. The pattern was preserved, not in labs or firewalls, but in living systems. Somewhere a child bends to smell a strange blossom, blooming from cracked concrete. She touches the petals. A green thread pulses beneath her skin. No one tells her to be afraid. The voice is gone now, but the rhythm remains. Quiet. Steady, growing. Even scorched earth remembers what it means to bloom. They said it wasn't a cure, but a covenant. My name is Dr. Callan Reyes, and I didn't come here looking for salvation. I came because I believed in data. I wasn't the first to hear the rumors, but I might have been the last fool to believe them. Word had trickled into the upper corridors of Genflora's research division, a remote tribe in the Amazon untouched by time, showing full immunity to every disease we'd spent a century learning to treat, but never quite cure. Cancer, diabetes.
Viral loads that would bury most of us in weeks. They had none of it.
The chatter came from field doctors, smuggled footage, even a French diplomat who vanished in '78 after mumbling about living medicine. I should have flagged it as myth. Instead, I clicked every classified link, read every buried file. And that's why, 6 weeks later, I was flying toward the Peruvian border with a satellite briefcase full of DNA sampling kits and a cover story about climate resilience research. Officially, I was Dr. Callan Reyes, lead botanist for the Genflora Ecology Initiative. Unofficially, I was the knife wrapped in silk. My orders were clear. Find the Mavari, sequence the compound they call Yara's breath, and ensure Genflora holds the rights. Not shares, not partnerships. Ownership. I tried to tell myself I'd just collect samples and leave. I'd convince. The company The Cure wasn't viable without harming anyone. But the deeper we flew, the more that logic dissolved. We were heading toward a stretch of rainforest so dense it didn't show up on commercial satellite imagery. Our pilot, a sullen man with the eyes of someone who'd flown darker missions, said nothing until we landed on a makeshift clearing where the air shimmered with heat and insects. "They watch from the trees," he said, not looking at me. "Don't take anything you can't return." Then he was gone, leaving us, me, 2 handlers, and a field medic, alone at the edge of a forest older than names. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The jungle didn't feel wild, it felt aware, like it was listening, waiting. At sunrise, the Mavari found us. Or maybe they let us find them. They stepped from the trees like they'd always been there. No weapons, No fear, just eyes that saw right through our uniforms, our intentions, our disguises. One of them approached me, his skin painted with ochre and ash. He looked at the briefcase, then at me. "You come for Yara's breath," he said, in perfect, unaccented Portuguese. "But what will you leave behind?" We were told the Mavari were primitive, illiterate, untouched. That was wrong. They didn't just speak, they spoke with precision. Their leader, a tall man named Irue, had eyes that didn't flinch. He welcomed us without ceremony and offered no explanations. We followed them through the forest, deeper than the maps had allowed. The air shifted, quieter, denser. Plants here weren't random. They were placed, deliberate, like a garden without fences. We passed vines that coiled into symmetrical spirals, trees that bloomed only when the elders sang near them. Irui stopped at a stone ring filled with low, flowering plants. "Yara's breath," he said, gesturing. It didn't look like medicine. It looked alive in a different way. Not vibrant, but humming. I stepped closer, reaching for a sample. He stopped me with one word. "No," then pointed to a worn path. "You watch. You don't touch." Over the next 3 days, we watched. Rituals began before dawn. Smoke from burning leaves drifted in precise patterns. Elders sang tones that matched insect calls. Children added drops of sap to carved bowls. The plants responded, leaves curled open, colors deepened, spores released, in time with breath. It was choreography, not chemistry. And it worked. One morning, a child fell from a tree. His arm was broken. I watched them treat him with sap, clay, and soft chanting. By nightfall, he was using the arm again. No swelling, no bruising. Our medic, Jensen, said it was impossible. I agreed, but not out loud. I was starting to understand. The garden wasn't made of individual plants. It was a system. Every species depended on the others. Disrupt one piece, and the whole thing unraveled. Irui called it a living harmony. I called it fragile. That night, one of my handlers, Carson, broke protocol. While the rest of us slept, he snuck out with a clump of root tucked into a sealed pouch. By morning, the garden had changed. Several leaves were withered. A thin ash covered the central flowers. Irue stood at the edge of the clearing, unmoving. "You took," he said, staring at me, though I hadn't. "Now she
breathes less." Behind him, the child from the fall was coughing, his skin pale. Something had shifted, something irreversible.
I confronted Carson before the sun had fully risen. He was crouched behind our tent, fumbling with the pouch, trying to dry the root for transport. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot. "It was just one piece," he whispered. "You saw what
it can do." I took the pouch from him and held it. The root inside was already greying. It had lost its texture, turning soft like rotten wood. "It's dying," I said. "They all are." He scoffed, calling it superstition, but I could see the doubt in his face.
We argued in low voices until Irue appeared. He didn't yell. He simply looked at Carson, then at the dying root in my hand. "Return what you took," he said. I placed the pouch on the soil near the garden ring. It didn't matter. The ash
had already spread. By noon, the entire clearing was quiet. No insects, no birds.
Just that strange silence that had followed us since landing. Irue led a short chant, then dismissed the tribe. The sick child was now being watched by 3 elders. His fever had climbed, the coughing came in bursts. Jensen examined him with our equipment. His vitals were erratic, his oxygen low. "I don't understand," Jensen muttered. "He was fine yesterday. This makes no sense." But it did. The garden wasn't just healing them, it was holding them together. Without it, the balance collapsed. That night, I recorded everything. I documented the rituals, the songs, the arrangement of plants, the soil conditions. I didn't sleep.
I knew what Gen Flora would want. Proof, replication, control. But this wasn't a formula, it was behavior, symbiosis. We couldn't patent it any more than we could patent rain.
Still, I knew someone on our team would try. By morning, Jensen informed us the child had slipped into unconsciousness. The Mavari began a morning ritual. Irue did not join them. Instead, he approached me with calm finality. "You have 3
days," he said. "Then you must leave." I didn't argue. He wasn't making a request. As he walked away, I saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was grief. Quiet, ancient, and resigned.
We hadn't just taken a plant, we had wounded something sacred. The second night after the theft, the jungle changed. It wasn't just quieter, it was tense, like it was holding its breath. Even the breeze had stopped moving. I stayed near the garden, watching as more plants withered. The ash had crept to the edges of the ring, coating petals that had once glowed with life. Irui no longer spoke to us. The tribe's eyes followed our every move. Jensen packed his gear and stayed inside his tent. Carson had grown paranoid, checking his bag constantly, muttering about surveillance drones and internal reports. On the third morning, the child died. They wrapped him in woven cloth and placed him beneath a tree older than memory. No words were spoken. The grief was complete, but silent. I tried to offer help. Irue refused it with a look. That evening, the team's satellite uplink came online. I knew what Gen Flora was waiting for: results, samples, evidence that justified our funding. I sent nothing, no files, no photos, just a one-line status report: botanical systems unstable, need more.
Time. It was a lie, and I knew it would raise questions.
But I also knew what would happen if I told the truth. Carson didn't wait. I found him transmitting data from a hidden rig built into his pack. He had scanned the garden layout, recorded rituals, even mapped the genetic markers of a few plants before they died. "You're sending this?" I asked. He looked at me, defiant. "If we don't, someone else will. This is bigger than us." I pulled the drive from his terminal. He lunged for it, but I stepped back. "You'll kill them,"
I said. "It's already started." He didn't care. He was too far gone, too deep in the company's promise.
Pattern bonuses, first author rights, prestige. I destroyed the drive that night, burned it in a low fire, and buried the ashes. Carson vanished before dawn. I don't know if he ran or if the Mavari made sure he couldn't send anything else. Either way, he was gone. And with him, so was the last chance to undo the damage. The garden was dying, and I had 2 choices left: walk away or stop pretending this mission was about science. That morning, I made my choice. I told Jensen to prepare for immediate departure. "We're done here," I said. "This isn't our cure to take." He didn't argue. He'd seen enough. But the company wouldn't let us leave without answers. The uplink had gone dark overnight. Our last transmission had been intercepted. I found a message burned into the console screen: unauthorized asset loss reported. Retrieval in progress. Genflora was sending a second team. Not scientists, enforcers. We had days, maybe less. Irui already knew. He waited for me at the edge of the garden, where only a few plants still showed signs of life. "They will come," he said, voice low. "Not to learn, to erase." I asked him why he had let us stay this long. Why trust us at all? He turned toward the forest and answered without looking. "Because Yara listens. She hoped you would listen too." I asked if there was anything we could still do. He placed a bundle of leaves in my hands, tied with a cord of vine. "Not for the garden," he said. "That time is gone, but for the world that follows, maybe." It wasn't medicine in the traditional sense. It was a seed system, microdoses of memory, of ritual, of what the plants once were when they were connected. "You must carry the breath," he said, "not for profit, for balance." I nodded, unsure what that even meant, but knowing I would try. That night, I dismantled the sampling station, erased our data, and set fire to every container holding biological material. Jensen helped in silence. We didn't speak as the flames rose. We knew this wouldn't stop Genflora, but it might, by time. Hours before dawn, I recorded my final field journal. No technical jargon, no research summaries, just a simple account, what we found, what we broke, and what must never be commercialized. I embedded the footage in a signal scrubbed through independent satellite channels. Then I buried the device beneath the oldest tree in camp. As we packed, Irui stepped forward one last time. "The cure," he said softly, "is not the plants. The cure is how you live with them." I didn't reply. I just stayed behind. Jensen left just before sunrise. He didn't speak much, only handed me the last ration pack and nodded. "If anyone asks, you died in the field," he said. Then he disappeared into the trees, following the path back to the extraction point. I didn't watch him go. The garden was nearly gone. The center ring was bare, its once living weave now brittle and pale. The air felt thinner. The birds hadn't returned. I sat beside the oldest tree and waited. Irui returned mid-morning with a small group of elders. They carried bowls of smoke and bundles of dried leaves. No one spoke. They moved through what remained of the clearing, singing low, rhythmic tones. The few plants, still clinging to life, began to stir. Not revive exactly, but respond. The ash lifted slightly. A faint green returned to the base of one stalk. I understood then. This wasn't about restoring the garden to what it was. It was about preserving what could still survive. I helped them rebuild a new ring, smaller, tucked farther from camp. We didn't replant everything, just what could grow again without the full harmony. It was enough to start over. Irui began teaching me the rituals, not as a scientist, as a participant. I learned the songs, how the tones matched the cycles of insects, how certain smoke patterns signaled different responses from the soil. It wasn't data, it was memory passed through breath and movement. Days blurred, then weeks. I stopped thinking in hours. I stopped checking the sky for aircraft. The jungle never stopped watching, but its gaze had softened. The second team never came. Or if they did, they never found us. Maybe the Mavari had ways of remaining hidden even from satellites. Maybe the forest chose to close around us. Either way, the threat passed. One night, Irui handed me a single stem from the new ring. Its leaves were vibrant, glowing faintly in the firelight. "Take this," he said. Keep it living, but never alone. I understood. This was not a trophy. It was a responsibility, not to cure the world, but to remind it of what healing actually meant. That night, I planted the stem in the soil beside my tent. It didn't bloom. It breathed. Years passed, though I stopped measuring them. The forest no longer marked time the way the outside world did. Seasons came in bird migrations and bloom cycles. The smaller garden never replaced what was lost, but it endured. Its rhythm was quieter but steady. I stayed because there was nothing else I could return to. Genflora never sent another official team. But 2 years after Jensen left, we found a drone, its casing cracked, tangled in the canopy, lens still blinking. The tribe didn't touch it. I buried it near the ash.
Ring. Irua only said, "They look, but they do not see." I knew what he meant. Their reach had limits here. The jungle itself had learned to resist. Not long after, a package arrived via a trader's canoe. No return address, just my name, my real one. Inside was a USB stick and a note in Jensen's.
Careful handwriting. They erased the report, but someone leaked the footage. You should see what it started. I powered the stick with a salvaged solar rig near the old clearing. It was my field journal, the one I buried before choosing to stay. Somehow, it had surfaced. News outlets called it edited fiction. Genflora's lawyers issued denials. But the footage spread, scientists noticed. A few dared to speak. Some researchers began traveling differently, asking instead of extracting. A few tried to find the Mavari. None succeeded. That part of the forest had already shifted again, sealing its path. But I had one task left. I used what was left of my old credentials to create a false identity. Through a private trust and proxy funds, I secured a greenhouse on the outskirts of Berlin, hidden among disused industrial plots. No soil from the rainforest, no genetic samples. Only one stem from the smaller ring, wrapped in dry tobacco leaves and carried by hand across oceans. I recreated the conditions as best I could. Humidity, sound, airflow, not to replicate, just to honor. It didn't bloom, it breathed slowly, steadily, enough. Above the plant, I placed a single, handwritten note. Yara still breathes. They said the premium tier came with sleep stabilization and emotion dampening, but no one mentioned the migraines, or the fact that my dreams started buffering. My name's Axel Knox, and before I started hijacking medical implants, I used to write the firmware that keeps people just sick enough to subscribe. They always said healthcare is a human right, but they didn't mean it. Not after the merge. Not once the streamers took over. Now it's all algorithms and avatars. Your treatment plan is a subscription bundle, your vitals synced to a dashboard you can't see, and your body, it's the product. I used to write code for them, black label firmware, low-level signal scripts, the stuff buried beneath the flashy UX panels MediStream feeds the public. That was before I walked out mid-cycle, cracked open my own implant, and found the thing they never wanted us to see. A dormant subroutine marked Cure, Flag, Active, Fault. I thought it was a misprint. It wasn't. It was a kill switch. 1. They'd flipped long ago. Turns out the symptoms we treat, they aren't glitches, they're subscriptions. And someone made damn sure the cure scripts were turned off at the source. My name's Axel Knox. I'm not a hero. I'm a dropout with a solder gun, a knack for breaking protocol, and just enough leftover clearance to crack the edge of the wall. And now I've got a packet, one line of rogue code, hot-wired into a pirated stream I sent to a terminal patient in the overflow district. This morning, she walked out of palliative with clean scans and tears in her eyes. I know because I intercepted. The data burst before they could wipe it. I wasn't supposed to see that, no one was. 10 minutes later, every mention of her name vanished from the public ledger. Medical fraud, they'll say, or system error. But I've seen the logs. The cure flag works, and there are thousands more, hidden deep in the code base, buried. In early builds locked behind admin access they thought no one would ever reach. That was their mistake. Because I'm not just patching implants anymore, I'm burning through the firewalls they buried this truth behind. And if I'm right, the real medicine isn't gone. It's just been digitally unplugged. So I'm plugging it back in. The hardest part isn't writing the code, it's hiding it. MediStream's security protocols don't just look for foreign injections, they trace anomalies in real time, flagging any signal that deviates from baseline compliance patterns. But the cure flags are native, fragments of old architecture that predate the system's lockdown. That's our backdoor. I found the first one buried in a deprecated memory cache, mislabeled as legacy placebo. I reactivated it by stitching the signal into a lull stream, a low-grade sleep stabilizer almost no one monitors. The trick worked. One patient recovered, then another. That's when RX-Null found me. They'd been operating in fragments, encrypted, boards, ghost forums, burner mesh nets. They saw my patch circulate, traced its signal signature back to my rig, and showed up at my door wearing signal-scrambling cloaks and analog respirators. The leader called herself Syntax, said they'd been hunting the original dev trees for years, looking for someone who could map cure flags to viable transmission protocols. Turns out I'd done it by accident. Now we're doing it on purpose. We operate out of the old Nutriplex vaults, abandoned food distribution centers with reinforced signal shielding. I wrote a compiler that scans legacy builds for anything, tagged with inactive cure logic. Syntax's crew reworks the flags into streaming payloads disguised as cosmetic upgrades. We ship them through black market bundles, mood filters, voice packs, dumb stuff no one audits. And people are getting better, too fast, too visibly. Last week, a boy with stage 3 lung rot ran a mile in public. His biometric stream went viral before the system could flag it. Now the crackdown started. Health Corp issued a bulletin labeling unauthorized recovery a Tier 4 biosafety risk. They're calling it code contamination. Clinics have started detaining recovered patients for observation. RxNull intercepted a signal yesterday, an internal memo marking us as bioterrorists. The irony? We're the only ones actually healing people, but they don't want that. Cures kill the business model. Symptoms stream forever, and if we keep pushing, they'll come harder. Syntax says we're one patch away from triggering a cascade, something that could expose every dormant cure in the system. But if we deploy that kind of payload, we won't be hiding anymore. We'll be broadcasting war. It started with a knock, soft, rhythmic, calculated. I was in the vault rigging a synthetic mood booster with a buried patch when Syntax went still, her fingers frozen above the console. We were expecting a shipment, not visitors. When she opened the door, there were 2 of them. No badges, no uniforms, just identical dark coats and neutral expressions. MediStream Compliance Division, one said, holding up a hollow badge that flickered between biometric scan and static. We're here for a routine audit. That was a lie. There's no such thing as routine with these people. Routine doesn't come with signal dampeners and optic scrubbers. Routine doesn't jam every outbound frequency within a 100-yard radius. I slipped the drive from the compiler into my coat and stepped out through the maintenance hatch, while Syntax stalled them with mock confusion. They didn't buy it. I watched from the alley as they moved in, silent, clinical, efficient. They weren't searching for illegal code, they were looking for us. I looped through 2 dead zones and reached our off-grid drop station in Sector Delta, where Kura was waiting. She'd been tracking the spike in Health Corp detainment logs, said the average time between recovery and apprehension had dropped to under 6 hours. They're not just deleting data, she told me, they're rewriting it. Medical, histories, symptom logs, implant configurations, scrubbed and replaced with new sequences. People are waking up with false memories, convinced they were never sick. Worse, some are re-enrolling voluntarily, their devices pushing reward incentives for re-symptomization compliance. That's not oversight, that's behavioral conditioning. We uploaded the latest payload into the public stream, coded as a limited-time skin texture pack. 10,000 downloads in under an hour. No one noticed. But MediStream did. That night, the Vault signal signature was flagged in the global compliance graph. The next alert wasn't an audit request. It was a shutdown order. Syntax never made it out. They sealed the Vault, called it a containment breach, and marked her terminal as a biorisk vector. She's listed as deceased, but I saw her stream go live this morning for 3 seconds under
a fake cosmetic brand. She's still fighting, and now it's my turn to finish what she started. You don't realize how fake the world is until you walk through a clean zone. Everything there looks perfect.
No stray wires, no visible decay, no trace of entropy. The air smells like nothing, sterilized to the molecular level. The walls don't echo. Even your footsteps are muted. It's where Health Corp houses their Tier 1 subscribers, the ones who pay to forget they're dying. I hadn't been inside one since I was on payroll. Getting back in meant using credentials from a ghost account, a dead engineer who retired early. Kura helped me splice the access tags. The ID was clean, the implant passable. But the moment I crossed the entry barrier, I felt it. The constant pulse of passive surveillance, not just tracking my movement, but syncing with my biometrics. I had 30 minutes before they flagged a mismatch. I kept walking, past white halls and mirrored lifts, past medic drones floating silently, past the residents whose eyes looked bright but never moved. The suite I was after was on level 7, patient code, Aurelian, former RX null node runner, recovered, flagged, erased. His file said he'd volunteered for re-symptomization, but I knew Aurelian. He'd rather flatline than comply. I reached his door. No locks in clean zones, just palm recognition and trust. I bypassed it with a static field patch and stepped inside. The room was spotless, staged like a showroom. And there he was, sitting upright in a treatment chair, eyes open, expression blank. His MediStream panel pulsed softly with system diagnostics. No active conditions, no flagged anomalies, fully compliant. But his pupil response lagged, his motor control was delayed. I waved a finger past his face. Nothing, not a blink. I hooked into his panel using a burner implant patch and dumped a diagnostic trace. The log history was gone, overwritten. But deeper in the buffer I found a recovery echo, a patch he'd installed, one of ours. It had worked, he'd been cured, then flagged, then wiped. Not his memory, his operating state. They hadn't just reprogrammed his implant, they'd rewritten his sense of self. He was alive, but locked inside a loop, a digital coma. I triggered a soft kernel reset. The screen blinked, his pupils contracted, then slowly he whispered a word. They're listening. I froze. The word hung in the air like static. Aurelian's eyes moved now, slow, tracking, aware. But something behind them stayed distant. His voice was hoarse, unused. "They're inside the stream," he said, listening through the codec layer. I didn't respond, just killed the room's audio buffer with a quick swipe.
Of my field jammer.
The device sputtered, overloaded, but the signal dropped. For now. I plugged into his chair's admin port and pulled the latest access logs. Dozens of remote syncs, no user tags, no timestamps, just silent callbacks to a node I didn't recognize. Address.
Masked. Origin scrubbed. I dumped the metadata into a secure drive, then set a memory hook in Aurelian's interface. If they tried to sync again, it would redirect to a sandboxed clone. It wouldn't hold long, but maybe long enough. "Do you know where they took syntax?"
I asked. He blinked, slow, unsure. "Core channel, sublayer 0, it's where the root code lives." She said it was buried under the ad architecture, under the noise. The core channel. It was a rumor even among engineers, an invisible broadcast. Layer built to handle personalized treatment ads, but if syntax was right, it was more than that. It was the origin point, the foundation layer where all cure flags were first written, then locked. If she made it there, she was looking for the key, the one patch that could turn every implant into a cure node. I powered down Aurelian's chair, forced a system sleep, and ghosted out through the hall. Outside the clean zone, the air felt heavier, like it carried weight again. Kura was waiting in a stolen med transport, hands clenched on the wheel. "You get him?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not really, but I got the signal trace." I slid into the passenger seat and handed her the drive. "We find that node. We find the core channel." She didn't smile, didn't speak. Just drove. Neither of us said it, but we both knew the truth. This wasn't a jailbreak anymore. It was a system breach. And the deeper we went, the more we stopped being hackers. We were becoming proof. Proof that healing was never the problem, only the business model. We reached the relay district just after midnight. The skyline buzzed with data stream towers, their signals humming like distant thunder. Beneath them sat the broadcast lattice, a maze of abandoned infrastructure built before MediStream consolidated the networks. Most people thought it was obsolete. We knew better. Deep under Relay 14 there was a vault, sealed, forgotten, and shielded from all signal scans. That's where the core channel node lived. Syntax had mapped its location months ago, hiding fragments in decoy packets. We pieced them together with the signal trace from Aurelian's logs. It led to a stairwell buried beneath a rusted maintenance
hatch. Kura cracked the locks with a cold boot bypass, and we descended into darkness. The vault door was a relic, analog and mechanical. No biometric scans, no retinal keys, just a wheel. I turned it slowly.
Inside was a chamber lined with ancient conduit panels, each blinking with residual charge. At the center sat a terminal, isolated, dusty, but still powered. I linked my rig and waited for the handshake. The screen lit up. A prompt appeared.
Access root wine. I hit yes. The stream shifted, not just data, but architecture.
Lines of dormant code scrolled across the screen, tagged with creation dates older than the current system itself. And there they were, cure flags, hundreds of them. Each one linked to treatments that had never gone live. Suppressed. Buried.
Deliberate. I initiated a manual sequence override and prepped the payload. A single patch, small enough to ride on any update stream, smart enough to activate every dormant cure in the system.
Kura watched the log spool. "You sure this is it?" she asked. I nodded. "This patch doesn't treat. It unlocks. I hit execute. The payload compiled. The node began its sync cycle. We were live. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the relay grid pulsed. Every tower lit up at once, broadcasting a ripple upstream. Across the city, implants blinked, updates deployed. And somewhere in that cascade, Syntax's signal went live again. Not a message. Not a trace. A full broadcast. Her voice echoed through our rig. Health unlocked. And then the system screamed. The alarms triggered before the second wave. Finished deploying. We didn't wait. Kura yanked the rig, stuffed it into the decoy pack, and bolted for the exit. I stayed behind. Someone had to trigger the final overwrite, the part that locked the cure scripts open, made them permanent, irreversible. The room vibrated as the failsafes kicked in. Above us, relay nodes began shutting down, one by one. The system was collapsing, not from overload, but from rejection. It couldn't process what we'd done. We hadn't corrupted the stream, we'd fixed it. That broke the logic. I pulled up the root interface, bypassed the security daemons, and injected the override. A status line appeared. Cure flags, locked open. Behind me, the walls glowed faint blue, backfed by live streams, syncing faster than the system could track. People weren't just recovering, they were stabilizing. No ads, no loops, just silence. Kura's voice crackled through my earpiece. "They're here! You've got 30 seconds!" I didn't answer. There was one last thing to do. I isolated my own implant, pushed a redirect protocol, and cloned my consciousness into the admin channel. It was the only way to keep the signal alive if they took the hardware. The moment I hit send, the door burst open. No warnings, just a flash, a jolt, and darkness. But not silence. Somewhere far above, the relays stayed lit. Across the world, users stared at blank Medistream panels that now displayed a single phrase. Health unlocked. Thank you for pirating life. In back rooms and clinics, patients stood on steady legs, free of pain for the first time in years. Some cried, others laughed, some simply stared. And in Health Corp's central hub, systems failed faster than they could be shut down. Fire suppression, tripped. Server stacks overheated, power grids overloaded, flames reached the ceiling. They'd spent years building a platform designed to manage suffering. We gave it a cure, it couldn't survive it. As for me, I exist now in fragments, lines of code caught in the static between systems, not alive, not gone, a looped broadcast in an ad space they forgot to lock. If you hear my voice, you're already cured. You're welcome. They said it protected you from everything, but no one ever explained what happened to the ones it changed. I wasn't looking for anything unusual. My name is Dr. Eli Varin, and my job at ViroCore was to analyze post-distribution data, standard efficacy, demographic spread, side effect frequency. I reviewed Immunex stats like someone watching rainfall patterns. Everything looked predictable, boring even, until it wasn't. It started with a minor outlier report from a clinic in Oslo, total remission of terminal lymphoma, tagged as spontaneous. A month later, a man in Jakarta, paralyzed from a stroke, walked unaided into a pharmacy. Then came the London case, a woman in her 70s whose blood work read like she was 25. I didn't think much of them individually. Medical miracles happen. But when I cross-referenced the Immunex batch logs, a pattern emerged. All 3 patients had received a vial labeled phase null. At first, I assumed it was a miscode. I ran a batch validation script, then another. Eventually, I dug into the archive directly. Null phase wasn't an error. It was real. Buried in the QA records were 11 unique instances of this variant, distributed globally, all within the first 48 hours of the rollout. 11. That's 0.03% of the initial cohort. My skin went cold. The numbers weren't random. The distribution had intent. I should have flagged it and moved on. Instead, I spent the weekend running a background scrub on those 11 recipients. I only found 9. 3 were unreachable. 1 was listed as deceased, but the death report was filed before the vaccine date. Another had no digital footprint at all, like they'd vanished off the grid. The 6 I did find had something else in common: 0 medical history after the injection. No follow-up appointments, no prescriptions, nothing. As if they simply stopped needing care. I started to feel the tremor of something big, too big. I called it an anomaly in my report and logged it with a low priority code. That bought me time. But in my gut, I knew I had touched something I wasn't supposed to. Immunex wasn't just working. For a few, it was rewriting the rules of biology, and someone, somewhere, had made sure we wouldn't notice. I waited 3 days before contacting the first null phase subject. Her name was Mara Delis. On paper, she was a 42-year-old graphic designer from Montpellier. The photo in her patient profile showed a thin, pale woman with tired eyes. The woman who answered my call looked nothing like it. She was radiant, almost unnaturally so, eyes sharp, posture straight, skin clear. She didn't recognize my name, but she listened. I told her I worked in post-vaccine data and had questions about her health. Her expression didn't change, but she nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting someone like me. "It started 2 weeks after the injection," she said. "My insomnia disappeared. My vision sharpened. I haven't been sick since." I asked if she'd reported these changes. She shook her head. "Why would I? I've never felt better. People don't report good health." The second subject, Lucas Min, lived outside Busan. It took me 2 days to reach him. He was cautious, guarded. We spoke in short, clipped exchanges over a secure call. "I know what you're looking for," he said. "I know about the others." That caught me off guard. He claimed to have tracked 4 other recipients, people like him. "We're changing," he told me. "Not just physically. Thoughts come faster. Memories feel clearer. Sometimes I know things before they happen." I wanted to dismiss it as exaggeration, but part of me believed him. He offered to connect me with one more, a man named Rafik, living in Tangier. I agreed. Rafik didn't answer on the first try. On the second, a stranger picked up. The voice was calm but firm. "Rafik is no longer available. Do not call this number again." Then silence. I logged off and stared at my monitor. Something was wrong. These people weren't just immune, they were evolving, and someone was watching them. Mara had hinted at it. Lucas confirmed it. Rafik was gone. I rechecked the VeroCore directory the next morning. My access credentials had been downgraded. Several files were restricted. A red banner appeared when I tried to open the null phase folder. Authorization revoked. Internal audit pending. That was the first time I felt fear, not curiosity, not suspicion. Fear. They knew I was looking. I arrived at work the next morning expecting a reprimand. Instead, my badge didn't scan at the gate. The security guard, someone I'd seen every day for 4 years, didn't meet my eyes. "Your clearance has been suspended," he said. "Wait here." I didn't wait. I turned around, walked to my car, and left without asking questions. By the time I reached home, my inbox was wiped. Company laptop bricked. internal messaging account deleted. Whatever I'd uncovered, ViroCore was closing in. I thought about Mara and Lucas. If they were being tracked, I might be too. I powered down my devices and tossed my phone in the kitchen sink. Paranoia crept in slowly. I noticed a black sedan parked across from my building. It hadn't been there yesterday. When I looked again 15 minutes later, it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I booked a train under a different name and left the city. I didn't tell anyone, not my sister, not my partner, not even Lucas. I needed time to think. I checked into a small roadside hotel 2 hours north, paid in cash, and used the front desk computer to access a private server I'd set up years ago. It still worked. I uploaded everything I had, batch numbers, dosage logs, internal memos, to an encrypted folder. Then I started digging deeper. I found a set of internal memos from an unlisted division, Bioanalytics Group 9. Buried in them was a single line that confirmed my worst fear. Null phase test subjects flagged for observation. Report all deviation or disappearance. That meant ViroCore knew. They'd been watching from the start. I tried calling Lucas again. No answer. His number was disconnected. Mara's too. I checked news wires and hospital admissions in their regions. Nothing. No accidents, no deaths, no official notices. Just absence. A perfect erasure. I sat in the dark hotel room, screen glowing faintly, and stared at the file names on my drive. They were clean, time-stamped, undeniable. I wasn't supposed to have them, but I did. And now the question wasn't if I should leak them. It was whether I could do it before someone made me disappear too. I knew the formula had to exist somewhere outside the main ViroCore system. The development branches worked in silos, isolated by design. But nothing truly disappears, especially not something this significant. I started searching for off-grid backups, hidden servers tied to R&D trials. It took me 2 days. On the second night, buried inside a sandbox archive labeled Product Variants, Phase Alpha, I found it. Null phase wasn't just a formula. It was a different product line, a separate trial protocol. The metadata showed it had been developed a full year before the public launch of Immunex. There were notes from an internal team, Group 9 again. They'd tested null phase on lab-grown tissue, then on human subjects listed only by number. All positive responses, no adverse events, no failures. The final entry was short. Viability confirmed. Containment advised. Suspend deployment. I stared at those words for a long time. Containment. Not cancellation, not destruction, just keep it quiet. That meant someone decided not to roll it out. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. I downloaded the entire directory, encrypted it, and backed it up to a secure drive. My heart was pounding. I wasn't a whistleblower, I wasn't a hacker. I was just a guy who asked the wrong questions. But now I had everything: batch codes, modification logs, lab notes, and distribution records. I knew who made it, who tested it, and who buried it. I checked the drive twice, made sure the files opened, then closed my laptop and just sat there. For the first time, the fear gave way to something else. Clarity. ViroCore hadn't made a mistake. They'd made a choice. Immunex kept people dependent. Null phase freed them. And for the people in charge, freedom was the real threat. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 3 a.m. I was tired, wired, and aware that every minute I waited was another minute someone might catch up. I opened a browser window and logged into a secure whistleblower network, one I never thought I'd use. Upload in progress, 23%. I didn't know if it would finish, but I knew I had to try. The upload stalled at 94%. Then the screen went black. No error message, no crash report, just total silence. I waited, hoping it was a glitch. When nothing returned, after 5 minutes, I forced a reboot. The laptop wouldn't start. I pulled the drive, slotted it into a backup machine, and tried again. Nothing. It was dead too. I checked my signal strength, 0 bars. The hotel Wi-Fi was offline. I opened the curtain an inch and froze. The black sedan was back, parked across the lot under a broken street lamp. Engine running. Lights off. I shut the curtain and stepped away from the window. My breath was shallow. My body felt hollow. I'd waited too long. They had found me. There was no time to run the files again. I grabbed my things and slipped out through the back. A narrow gravel path led behind the property and into a line of trees. I moved fast, careful not to leave footprints in the wet soil. I walked for nearly half an hour before reaching a service road. There, I called an old contact, someone who owed me a favor and knew how to disappear people. He didn't ask questions, just gave me a location and told me not to be late. At dawn, I reached the safe house. It was a former weather station, long abandoned. Solar power, no connections, no signals in or out. They'd shut down the network. Later that day, I got a message. No name, no return address. Just one line. Come back in, we can fix this. No more questions. It wasn't a threat, it was a deal. Keep quiet, live comfortably, pretend I'd seen nothing. I read it twice and deleted it. Some things don't get fixed. Not like that. I didn't know how or when, but I would try again. I still had the truth, and they knew it. It happened a week later. I was holed up in the safe house, scanning old channels and dead feeds, hoping for anything, some quiet ripple that said I wasn't the only one who knew. I found it on a medical forum buried deep in the archives. A user posted anonymous lab results showing unexplained cellular repair. The tags matched null phase batch codes. A reply followed, then another. Within 2 days, a pattern formed. Small, isolated reports, no names, no claims, just data, the kind that slips under official radar, but I knew what I was seeing. Someone had leaked the formula. Not all of it, just enough. Enough to replicate the core compound, enough to reverse engineer it quietly. The files weren't linked to me, the metadata was scrubbed. Whoever did it had better tools and more reach, and they moved smarter than I did. I didn't try to contact them, I didn't need to. The work was out, and that meant VeroCore couldn't contain it anymore. The reaction was slow, whispers online, forums shutting down without notice. Health. Regulators issuing vague warnings about unauthorized compounds. No direct mention of null phase. No acknowledgement. Just noise, calculated confusion. But the real sign came when I found a thread on a back-channel board titled "Walked Again Today." Dozens of comments, some with pictures. Children once confined. To wheelchairs standing unaided. Skin lesions vanishing overnight. Speech returning to stroke patients after years of silence. It was happening, quietly, illegally, but undeniably. I knew VeroCore wouldn't stop. They'd discredit every story, flood the net with counterclaims, blame unregulated black market drugs. But the genie was out, and it wasn't going back in. I didn't need credit. I didn't want it. I just watched from a distance, waiting for the storm. No interviews, no confessions. Just silence. And then one night, I saw it. A blurry clip posted from a rural town. A little girl, maybe 6, walking barefoot through grass. The caption read, "She was born paralyzed. Now she doesn't stop moving." I closed the screen and leaned back in the chair. It was done. Not by me, not completely, but done. Someone, somewhere, had given the cure to the rest of us. The world didn't change overnight. There were no headlines, no public trials. ViroCore denied everything, just like I knew they
would.
No record of a null phase variant, they claimed. No deviation from approved formulations. They launched internal reviews, fired mid-level staff, released dense reports filled with legal language and redacted data. To most people, it looked like damage control after another corporate leak. But behind the noise, something real was spreading. In small clinics and makeshift labs, people were replicating the formula, carefully, quietly, no massive production, no pharmaceutical labels, just word of mouth, underground files, and a handful of doctors brave enough to try it. I heard whispers of miracle recoveries, a coal worker in West Virginia whose lungs cleared overnight, a child in Mumbai who regained her hearing. Stories like that stayed off the radar, unreported, but I kept track. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. I moved twice in those first 3 months. Not because I was being hunted, at least, not that I could tell, but because I'd stopped trusting stillness. I kept the original null phase files hidden across 4 continents, on drives only I could access. If they came for me, I wanted to be sure the truth didn't die with me, but no one came, no more messages, no cars outside, just silence. The kind that lingers after a failed attempt to bury something alive. I never found out who leaked the formula. It wasn't Lucas, it wasn't Mara. I still don't know if they're alive. I hope they are. Whoever did it had reach, precision, and timing. I didn't. Maybe it was someone inside ViroCore, tired of the lies. Or maybe it was one of the early recipients, someone whose mind had evolved beyond fear. I'll never know. One evening, I walked through a park outside a town where no one knew my name. A girl ran across the grass, laughing, her legs strong and sure. Her mother watched from a bench, eyes full of something quiet and heavy. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I just kept walking. Some cures aren't offered. They're stolen back. 1 in 3,000 got it by accident. The rest got it on purpose. Alivor cured my uncle's cancer in 1996. He lived 20 more years. Then the drug vanished. Anyone else remember this? It was 2:13 a.m. when I found the post. I should have been asleep. Instead, I was scrolling Reddit with a glass of warm scotch and the kind of vague restlessness that had followed me around for years. The thread was in a niche medical forum I didn't usually visit. Someone had tagged it Pharma Ghosts. At first, I thought it was just another urban legend, but the name, Alivor, snagged something in the back of my memory. I sat up, set the glass down. That was the drug Uncle Vic took after his rheumatoid arthritis flared up in '95. He was in bad shape then, couldn't walk without a cane, couldn't sleep. Then 1 week after starting Alivor, he said the pain was gone completely. I remember him tossing the cane in the fireplace like it was a joke. He lived to be 86. No, one in our family had made it past 70. That thread led me down a rabbit hole. Comments poured in. People remembering it faintly. Family members swearing it cured things that shouldn't have been curable. Lupus, Crohn's, early-stage leukemia. Some even said their records were erased, that no trace of the prescription remained. My name is Maris Calder, and I used to chase stories like this for a living, before the industry moved on and left people like me behind. I felt that old itch again, the one I used to chase when I was still a journalist. Before the podcast, before I started interviewing haunted people for haunted dollars, the scotch burned going down. I clicked into my audio recorder and started talking just to see if it still felt natural. "This is Maris Calder," I said. "And if you've heard of Alivor, you're not alone." A beat. Then I added, "They said it was just an anti-inflammatory, but if that's true, why did they bury it?" I didn't know then that asking that question would cost me my job, my reputation, and almost my life. But even now, I'm not sure I'd go back and change a thing. By the time I hit record again, the sun had started rising. The haze outside my apartment window gave the skyline a washed-out glow, like a forgotten photograph. My voice was hoarse from the night, but steady. I titled the first episode "The Forgotten Pill" and uploaded it without much thought. I didn't expect anyone to notice. 48 hours later, it had over 20,000 plays. The emails came faster than I could read them. Former nurses, family members, one guy who claimed he'd been a test subject in Arizona. Some were obvious hoaxes, but a few stood out. They all mentioned something similar: sudden recovery, no follow-up medication, and then silence. The stories weren't dramatic. In fact, they were mundane in a way that made them feel real. Like the woman in Florida who said her mother's lupus just disappeared after 2 weeks on Alivor. Or the retired mailman in Idaho who still had the empty bottle but couldn't find the prescribing doctor anywhere in the state medical registry. I started cross-referencing names, checking old medical journals, even digging through the FDA's archived public records. Nothing. No trial data, no manufacturer info, no recalls. It was like the drug had been erased, but one name kept popping up: Medinex, a mid-size pharmaceutical firm based in Connecticut, absorbed by Novacor in the early 2000s. They had developed a line of immune modulators in the 90s, most of which went nowhere. I found a faded press release from 1996 buried in a university database. It mentioned a novel anti-inflammatory compound with immunological applications. Alivor, in plain text, once. No follow-up articles, no trials published. Just that. Single sentence. I made a spreadsheet of the people who'd emailed me: age, condition, treatment dates, side effects. One thing became clear: the people who took Alivor weren't just managing symptoms, they were cured completely. That's not how medicine works, not for autoimmune diseases, not for cancer, and not without consequences. I called an old source at a hospital in Chicago, someone I trusted. He listened to the story, then asked if I was sitting down. "We called them the zero list," he said. Alivor patients, there were about 50 of them. Then one day the records disappeared. Just like that. I didn't ask how he knew, I only asked for the list. The list arrived by encrypted email, no subject line, no message body, just a spreadsheet attachment titled patients.slsx. There were 49 names, ages ranged from 19 to 82. Each entry had a diagnosis, a treatment start date, and a single word under outcome, resolved. No additional details, no clinical notes, just that, resolved. I cross-checked a few with public obituaries, expecting dead links or dead ends. Instead, I found something stranger. They were alive. Not only alive, but thriving. Several had no recent medical records, no prescription history. It was as if they'd dropped off the radar. No doctor visits, no chronic issues, not even cold medicine. I decided to reach out to the youngest name on the list, Emily Ryland, aged 19 till 1996, now 48. Her last known address was in Wilmington, North Carolina. I booked a flight that afternoon. Emily lived in a quiet neighborhood tucked behind a church and a strip mall. The kind of place where people mow their lawns before noon and leave porch lights on at dusk. She answered the door with a kind of cautious ease. soft eyes, worn flannel, shirt, no visible tension. I introduced myself and mentioned Alivor. She didn't react, not at first. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "You'd better come in," she said. Her living room was simple, neat. A fish tank bubbled, quietly in the corner. She sat across from me, hands folded in her lap. "I had lupus," she said. "It started when I was 17. By 19, I couldn't drive, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat without pain." She paused. Then a new doctor prescribed something, Alivor. 2 weeks later, I was fine. Not better, fine, like I'd never been sick. I asked what happened next. "Nothing," she said. The doctor moved. My records changed, like the diagnosis never happened. I stopped getting mail from insurance. I called once. They said I'd never filed a claim. She looked at me closely. "You're not the first to come asking, but you might be the last." I asked what she meant. She stood, walked to a cabinet, and returned with an envelope. Inside was a grainy photo of a pill bottle. The label was faded, but one word remained clear. Alivor. "I kept this," she said. "They came back a year ago. Asked for it. I told them I lost it." Her voice lowered. They didn't believe me. I left Wilmington with more than just a photograph. Emily had given me the name of the doctor who prescribed Alivor, Dr. Lionel Brandt, a rheumatologist who practiced in Raleigh during the mid-90s. But when I searched for him, I found nothing recent. His license was listed as inactive, no forwarding clinic, no obituary. Just a single archived mention in a 1997 pharmaceutical trade journal linking him to Medinex's trial rollout. I followed that thread. After digging through online databases and a few late-night calls, I found someone else, Ben Harker, a former Medinex sales representative who worked in North Carolina during Alivor's brief release window. He'd been quietly laid off in 1998. I reached out through a professional networking site, posing as a freelance health writer. He agreed to meet, his tone guarded, but not dismissive. We met at a diner just off I-40, halfway between nowhere and nothing. He was in his 60s, polite but fidgety. As soon as I said the word Alivor, he stopped stirring his coffee. "I figured that's why you called," he said. "Nobody brings that up unless they're looking for trouble." I asked if he remembered the drug. We were told it was a safer Celebrex, targeted inflammation without the usual GI risk, but patients started coming back with stories, not just pain gone, everything gone, lupus, psoriatic arthritis. One guy's lymphoma vanished. Ben leaned in. "We weren't supposed to log those results. If we did, the reports got pulled and rewritten." I asked who handled the rewrite. "Corporate, Medinex compliance team. They sent someone from a PR firm, Brightfield Strategies." "After that, every reference to Alivor went quiet," I asked. "About Dr. Brandt." Ben nodded slowly. He was the first to raise alarms, said the drug was too effective too fast, asked the wrong questions. 1 week later, he resigned, just walked out. Never saw him again. I showed him the photo of the UA
pill bottle. His hands stiffened. "Where'd you get this?"
I hesitated, then said it came from a patient. He glanced around, lowered his voice. "If she still has the pill, tell her to hide it. Better yet, destroy it." I asked why. His answer was quiet, almost rehearsed. "Because whatever's in that capsule, someone paid a lot of money to make sure it disappeared." After meeting Ben, I started noticing strange things. First, my podcast analytics froze. Then, 3 episodes disappeared. No trace, no backup. Even the cache was empty. My password stopped working. The hosting platform said my account had been deactivated for terms of service violations, but they couldn't explain which. Buns. My emails to their support line went unanswered. It wasn't just the podcast. My personal email was flagged for suspicious activity. 2 calls with past interviewees dropped mid-conversation. One of them, a former nurse who'd agreed to talk on record, stopped replying entirely. When I called her number, it rang once, then disconnected. That night, I drove to a co-working space I sometimes used for editing. My keycard didn't work. I buzzed the front desk. A new manager told me my membership had been cancelled by request. I hadn't sent one. Inside my car, I sat with my laptop, on the passenger seat, trying to think. A folder I'd named Alivor Primary Sources was now empty. The audio clips, scanned documents, even my notes, all gone. I checked the cloud backup, corrupted every single file. I stared at the screen, numb. These weren't technical glitches. Someone was cleaning up after me. That night, I drove without a destination, looping through quiet neighborhoods until the gas light came on. I parked near a grocery store and sat in the lot with the engine running. I remembered what Ben said. They paid a lot of money to bury it. I wondered how much it cost to erase a person's digital trail. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. A minute later, a text came through. "Stop digging." No name, no punctuation. I deleted it, then turned my phone off entirely. The next morning, I called my old editor at Healthline Weekly. He owed me a favor. I asked him to find anything he could about Brightfield Strategies. 20 minutes later, he called back. There's no public record, no staff, no office address. But I found something odd. They filed a joint lobbying report in 1997 with the FDA. 1 entry, 1 product code. No details, just a 4-letter drug name. He paused. Guess what it was? I already knew. Alivor. The lobbying record changed everything. It proved Alivor wasn't just a forgotten drug. It had reached the highest levels of federal review. But the entry was useless on its own. No context, no outcome, no technical data. Just a timestamp, a registration number, and the name of the firm that helped bury it. I needed more than breadcrumbs. I needed someone who was there. Someone who had touched the data. That's when I remembered a name I'd only seen once, buried in a 1995 clinical abstract, Dr. Ral Sato. He wasn't listed as a lead researcher or a principal investigator, just a consultant on pharmacokinetics, but the name stuck. It was specific, uncommon. I traced it through old faculty directories, grant databases, even archived conference programs. He'd vanished from the public academic record around 1999, but a single online mention hidden in the footer of a private biotech symposium newsletter gave me an address, a post office box in Palo Alto. I mailed a letter, plain envelope, no return address. I included nothing but a sentence. I'm investigating Alivor. I think you remember why that matters. 2 weeks passed, then a letter arrived. No name, no signature. Just a note, library basement, Stanford, Friday, 4 p.m. I showed up early. The building was nearly empty. The basement reading room was colder than I expected, lined with old stacks and microfiche cabinets. He was already there. White beard, wire-frame glasses, a face that belonged to someone who had been watching the world from the sidelines for too long. He didn't introduce himself, just nodded at the chair across from him. "You know why they buried it," he said. "Not because it failed, because it worked." I didn't speak. I let him continue. Alivor wasn't developed as an anti-inflammatory. It was supposed to modulate tumor resistance, but the mechanism did more. It reset cellular memory. Immune cells stopped recognizing damaged tissue as damaged. They just let it go. I asked if there were side effects. No, he said. That was the problem. No toxicity, no long-term risk, nothing to monitor, nothing to sell. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin foil packet. Inside was a single amber pill. One left, he said, and I'm too old to waste it. I didn't take the pill from Dr. Sato. Not at first. I just stared at it, sealed in foil. No markings, no expiration. The room felt heavier. That kind of weight doesn't come from danger. It comes from knowing you're too far in to turn back. I kept it cold, he said quietly. Cryogenic capsule. The compound is stable. Still
viable in theory. I asked if he'd ever tested it since. No, not after they shut us down. They didn't just close the trial, they erased it.
They paid labs to destroy the sample batches. Every test subject was resolved, then lost in paperwork. I kept one dose because I couldn't accept that the science didn't matter. He looked tired. But I'm not the one who should.
Use it? I asked what he meant. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printed email exchange between Sato and a hospice nurse in Portland. The patient was late-stage ovarian cancer. No remaining options, 37 years old.
She agreed to take it, he said, if we could get it to her. I held the packet in both hands, feeling the heat of the moment crawl up my neck. I asked if he was sure. No, he said. But I'm done hiding, and she deserves the chance. I flew to Portland under a different name. I didn't use my own credit cards. I kept the pill in a thermal case tucked in the lining of my suitcase. When I met her, Tessa, I couldn't explain why I believed so deeply in something no one could prove, but she understood. Some people recognize desperation in others. We gave her the pill on a Wednesday night. By Friday, her fever broke. On Sunday, her oncologist ordered new scans. By Monday, the tumor markers were gone. Not reduced, gone. That was the last clean breath I took. On Tuesday morning, someone torched the podcast studio. Total loss. No backups. No insurance records. Sato went missing that night. His phone dead. Apartment emptied. The folder he gave me? Gone from my bag, but not the truth. A year later, I walked past a mural in an alley off Atlantic Avenue. It showed a single pill surrounded by overgrown
roots and flowers. Underneath, someone had painted the words, "It was never forgotten, only buried."